Welcome to the Channel Science documentary for sleep. I'm glad you're here. However you've arrived, you don't need to be alert, and you don't need to stay. It's fine if your body's already slowing, if your breathing is softening on its own, if the edges of the day are beginning to blur. Nothing is expected of you. Tonight, we're exploring the moons of Jupiter not as a lesson, not as a journey, just as something calm and real to keep you company for a while. You're allowed to rest here. You're allowed to drift. You're allowed to miss parts, or all of it, and still be welcome. Jupiter has many moons, dozens that we've named, and likely more that are still small and quiet and unnamed. Some are large and round, almost planet-sized. Some are irregular, shaped by old collisions and long gravity. There are moons with ice, moons with rock, moons with oceans hidden far below frozen surfaces. There are shadows moving slowly across Jupiter's clouds, and eclipses that repeat with patient precision. These are real places, real motions, real facts, observed carefully over many years. As we talk about them, you might feel curiosity, or calm, or nothing in particular. Your attention may come and go. You might notice your thoughts wandering, or fading, or looping gently. All of that is normal here. You don't need to remember names or details. You don't need to follow the thread. If you'd like, you can simply let the words pass by, the way distant light passes through space present, unhurried and unconcerned with whether it's noticed at all. Astronomers have long noticed that 4 of Jupiter's moons stand apart, not because they demand attention, but because they are quietly consistent. Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto move in wide, steady paths, tracing rhythms that repeat over and over. They were first seen centuries ago, small points of light beside a much brighter planet, returning night after night to nearly the same places. That steadiness is part of what makes them gentle to think about. They are always there, moving, whether anyone is watching or not. Io is the closest of these large moons, and it is shaped by gravity in a way that never really settles. Jupiter pulls on it strongly, and so do the neighbouring moons, and the result is heat inside Io's rocky body. That heat escapes through volcanoes, many of them slowly reshaping the surface. Even so, Io's motion is predictable. Its orbit repeats. Its path does not rush. You don't need to picture the volcanoes clearly. You don't need to imagine the colours or the scale. It's enough to know that something can be active and still orderly, restless and still calm in its repetition. If that idea fades as you hear it, that's fine. The moon keeps moving anyway, carrying its heat quietly through space. Europa moves a little farther out, and its surface looks very different. It is bright and smooth, crossed with longer, dark lines that curve and intersect. These lines are fractures in ice, not sudden breaks, but slow openings and closings over time. Beneath that ice, scientists believe there is a deep ocean, kept liquid by gentle internal warmth. This ocean is not something that needs imagining in detail. It doesn't need waves or storms or creatures. It can simply be water, held in the dark, moving slowly under miles of ice. The idea has returned again and again in observation and measurement, each time sounding a little softer. You might notice your mind drifting here. That's natural. An ocean that no one sees directly doesn't require focus. It exists whether you're listening or not, whether you remember it later or not. Europa continues its quiet orbit, carrying that hidden water with it, circling Jupiter again and again without concern for attention. Ganymede is the largest moon in the solar system, larger even than the planet Mercury. Despite its size, it moves with the same patience as the others, never hurrying, never stopping. It has layers rock, ice, metal arranged by gravity over long spans of time. It even has its own magnetic field, a subtle one, interacting gently with Jupiter's much stronger presence. A magnetic field is simply a kind of invisible structure, shaping how charged particles move nearby. You don't need to follow how it works. You don't need to picture lines or forces. It's enough to know that something unseen can still be measured, still be real, still be steady. Ganymede turns slowly, showing the same face to Jupiter each time, a habit shared by many moons. That locked rotation is calm and repetitive. Nothing surprises it. Nothing changes quickly. If this part becomes blurry, that's okay. Large things don't need close attention to remain large. Ganymede continues on, massive and quiet, carrying its layers and fields through space, unaffected by whether it's remembered. Callisto orbits farther out, and it feels older somehow. Its surface is heavily cratered, marked by impacts from long ago. Unlike some other moons, Callisto hasn't been reshaped much by internal heat. It has stayed largely as it was, holding on to the marks of time. Those craters aren't dramatic events here. They are simply records, gentle reminders that time passes and that not everything needs to be renewed. Callisto turns slowly, its face pocked and calm, unchanged for billions of years. There may be an ocean beneath Callisto's surface as well, deeper and colder, but still present. Even the most ancient surfaces can hide quiet movement below. You don't need to hold that contrast in mind. Old and new, still and moving, they can exist together without explanation. If your attention slips here, Callisto doesn't mind. It keeps circling Jupiter at a respectful distance, untroubled, unhurried. Beyond these four, Jupiter has many smaller moons, each with its own path. Some are irregular, captured long ago by gravity. They move at angles, some even backward, taking wide, looping routes around the planet. Their names are less familiar, and their shapes are uneven, but their motion is no less real. They don't need to be remembered individually. They don't ask for distinction. They simply move, each one tracing a pattern that has settled into stability over time. You might feel yourself sinking a little now, or floating, or just staying where you are. That's all welcome. The moons of Jupiter continue regardless, large and small, smooth and scarred, warm inside or cold throughout. They circle a planet made mostly of gas, around a star far away, in a system that doesn't hurry. If you fall asleep, they keep going. If you stay awake, they keep going. And if you drift somewhere in between, that's a perfectly natural place to be. Jupiter itself is always there in the background, even when the focus rests on its moons. It is vast, mostly made of gas, turning slowly, wrapped in pale bands and long-lived storms. The moons do not orbit empty space. They orbit a presence heavy, steady, patient. That relationship shapes everything about their motion. Astronomers describe this as gravity, a quiet rule rather than a forceful one. Nothing is pulled suddenly. Nothing is grabbed. Instead, paths curve gently, again and again, settling into shapes that repeat. The moons move because Jupiter is there, and Jupiter remains because it has always been there. You don't need to follow how gravity works. You don't need equations or diagrams. It's enough to know that closeness matters and distance matters, and that balance can last a very long time. If your thoughts wander while this idea drifts past, nothing is lost. The moons keep their paths without your help. Some of Jupiter's moons move in a kind of shared rhythm called orbital resonance. Io, Europa, and Ganymede are linked this way. Their orbits subtly timed to one another. For every orbit Ganymede makes, Europa makes 2, and Io makes 4. This pattern repeats endlessly, like a quiet counting that never needs to be spoken aloud. This resonance gently squeezes the moons as they move, stretching them just enough to create internal warmth. That warmth travels slowly through rock and ice, changing surfaces over time, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to matter. You don't need to keep the numbers straight. You don't need to remember which moon moves how many times. The idea itself is soft that repetition can create energy, and that energy can exist without urgency. If this detail slips away, it leaves no gap behind. The rhythm continues on its own. When spacecraft have passed through the Jovian system, they've sent back images and measurements taken quietly, patiently. Cameras watch shadows cross cloud tops. Instruments listen for faint magnetic whispers. Signals travel a long way back to Earth, thinning as they go, arriving delayed but intact. These observations are careful, not rushed. They accumulate slowly, year by year, filling in a picture that is never complete and never finished. There is no final view of Jupiter's moons, only a gradual settling into familiarity. You may feel your awareness thinning here, like those signals travelling outward. That's all right. Distance softens things. Not everything needs to arrive fully formed. Europa's surface, when seen up close, looks like a cracked shell that has healed many times. The lines curve and overlap, telling a story without words. Ice shifts, refreezes, and shifts again. Nothing breaks all at once. Beneath that surface, pressure increases, temperature rises slightly, and water remains liquid. Not warm, not turbulent, just fluid enough to move, just fluid enough to persist. Scientists talk about chemistry and energy gradients, about possibilities that unfold over long periods. You don't need to think about any of that. You can let the idea remain vague and distant, a dark ocean, sealed away, existing quietly, without witnesses. If your attention drifts off entirely here, Europa continues to circle Jupiter, its ice flexing gently, its ocean shifting slowly, without any awareness of being imagined at all. Ganymede's size gives it a different feeling. It has enough gravity to pull itself into a nearly perfect sphere, enough mass to hold on to structure, enough presence to matter on its own terms. Its surface shows regions of old, dark terrain and lighter, younger areas where ice has moved and reshaped itself. Time overlaps there, old beneath new, still beneath slightly less still. Ganymede's magnetic field interacts with Jupiter's, creating small auroras that trace invisible paths above its surface. They are not bright spectacles. They are faint, measurable, and calm. You don't need to picture light or colour. You can let the idea pass as a whisper that even far from the sun, subtle glows can appear, guided by forces you never feel directly. If this slips by unnoticed, nothing breaks. Callisto, farther out, feels quieter still. It avoids most of the gravitational tugging that warms the inner moons. It keeps its distance, and in doing so, it keeps its stillness. Its surface records impact after impact, layered gently over time. There is no urgency to erase them, no need to refresh. Callisto carries its history openly, without commentary. This kind of stillness doesn't demand attention. It doesn't ask to be admired. It simply exists. If your mind settles here, that's fine. If it moves on, that's fine too. Beyond these larger moons, Jupiter's smaller companions trace quieter, stranger paths. Some are only a few kilometers across, irregular and uneven. They were likely captured long ago, their origins far from Jupiter itself. Their orbits tilt and stretch, looping in wide arcs. They don't follow the same neat patterns as the larger moons, but over time, even these irregular paths become stable. Chaos, given enough time, softens into predictability. You don't need to remember their names. Most people never learn them. They are not lesser for that. They move just the same, turning slowly, obeying the same gentle rules. You may notice your breathing changing on its own now, or not notice it at all. Both are welcome. Nothing here depends on your awareness. Jupiter's moons cast shadows on the planet's clouds, small dark circles that drift across bands of colour. These shadows are precise, timed, and temporary. They appear, move, and fade without leaving a mark. Astronomers can predict these events far in advance. They know when a shadow will begin and when it will end. There is comfort in that kind of predictability, not excitement, just steadiness. If this image dissolves before it fully forms, that's okay. Shadows pass whether they're watched or not. Sometimes two moons align, one slipping into the shadow of another, darkening briefly before re-emerging. These eclipses are slow and subtle, no sudden changes, just a gradual dimming, then a gradual return. You don't need to hold on to the sequence. Dimming and brightening happen everywhere, all the time. Attention does the same. Far from Earth, far from urgency, Jupiter's moons continue their long conversation with gravity and time. They do not rush, they do not pause, they simply keep going. If you're still awake, you're welcome here. If you're drifting, that's welcome too. And if sleep has already begun to take you elsewhere, the moons will still be there, moving gently, keeping their quiet paths through the dark. Light takes time to travel from Jupiter to Earth. When astronomers look at the planet and its moons, they are never seeing them exactly as they are now. They are seeing them as they were tens of minutes ago, light carrying that earlier moment patiently across space. This delay is small in cosmic terms, but it softens the idea of observation. Nothing is immediate. Everything arrives gently, already in the past. You don't need to hold on to that delay as a concept. It can simply be there, like a cushion between events and awareness. Even if your attention drifts, even if you stop listening entirely for a while, Jupiter's moons remain slightly out of reach, doing what they've already done, unbothered by timing. Io's surface changes more quickly than most moons, but even there, change is measured in years, decades, centuries. Lava flows cool and harden, sulfur compounds settle and fade, plumes rise and fall, not in bursts, but in cycles. From far away, these changes blur together. Io remains recognizable, familiar in outline. Activity does not mean chaos. It simply means motion within bounds. If your mind wants to wander here, that's natural. The idea that something can be constantly active without being demanding is not one that needs effort to understand. It's enough to know that motion can exist without urgency, and that rest does not always mean stillness. Europa's ice shell responds slowly to tides raised by Jupiter's gravity. The surface flexes just a little as the moon moves closer and farther along its orbit. That flexing opens cracks, then closes them again. Over time, the ice rearranges itself. Nothing tears violently, nothing collapses. The changes are subtle enough that they take patience to notice. You don't need to picture the mechanics of this. You can let it remain abstract, a surface that adjusts, a body that yields gently rather than resisting. If this thought slips away, it leaves no emptiness behind. Europa continues its adjustments without needing to be observed. Beneath that ice, pressure keeps water from freezing, even though sunlight barely reaches the surface. Energy moves upward from the interior, faint but persistent. The ocean remains dark, sealed, and quiet. This hidden persistence is one of the calmer ideas in planetary science. Something can last for billions of years without being seen, without being named, without being disturbed. It doesn't need recognition to remain stable. If this idea settles into you, that's fine. If it fades before it settles, that's fine too. Ganymede's rotation is locked, always turning the same face toward Jupiter. This is called tidal locking, but there's nothing forceful about it. It's simply the end result of long interaction, of energy slowly dissipating until a stable pattern remains. Many moons and planets share this habit. It is not rare. It is what happens when time is allowed to work without interruption. You don't need to remember the term. You don't need to remember which moons do this. The idea itself is gentle that over long enough spans, systems settle into rhythms that no longer change much. If your thoughts drift toward rest here, that makes sense. Stability invites that kind of drifting. Ganymede's interior may hold multiple layers of ice and water stacked beneath one another, separated by pressure. These layers do not mix quickly. They remain where they are, each one quietly doing what conditions allow. There is no rush to connect them, no need for exchange. They persist side by side, balanced by gravity and temperature. This layered existence doesn't require close attention. You can let it pass through your awareness lightly, like a distant shape glimpsed without focus. Callisto, farther out, experiences weaker tides. It is less squeezed, less warmed. As a result, its interior changes very slowly. Its surface is a map of impacts accumulated over immense spans of time. Each crater is a record, not an event. The violence that created it is long gone. What remains is shape, softened by age. There is something calm about surfaces that no longer need to be renewed. Callisto doesn't erase its past. It carries it quietly, without interpretation. If this feels heavy or distant, that's okay. You don't need to engage with the weight of time. Callisto holds it on your behalf. Jupiter's smaller moons move farther out, some in loose groups, some alone. Their orbits are often tilted, stretched, or irregular. They do not follow neat, flat paths. And yet, they are stable. They return again and again to similar positions. They do not collide. They do not drift away. Stability does not require symmetry. It does not require elegance. It only requires that forces balance over time. You don't need to remember this distinction. Irregular things can still be reliable. That idea can remain with you or slip away without consequence. When spacecraft pass near these moons, they move quickly, borrowing speed from Jupiter's gravity. The encounters are brief, images are taken in moments, then the spacecraft moves on. What remains are data and memories of a passing glance. Even so, those brief moments add to understanding slowly, over years. You don't need to imagine the spacecraft. You don't need to follow its path. The idea that brief contact can still be meaningful is enough, and even that is optional. Sometimes Jupiter's immense magnetic field sweeps over its moons, filling space with charged particles. This environment is harsh in some ways, but predictable. The moons endure it simply by being where they are. They don't adapt consciously. They don't respond actively. They exist within conditions, and that is enough. If you're feeling tired now, that's welcome. If you're feeling alert, that's welcome too. Nothing here asks you to change. Jupiter's moons continue their paths whether or not they are named, whether or not they are imagined, whether or not they are remembered. They have been doing so long before any listener was here. They will continue long after attention fades. You don't need to hold on to that continuity. You can let it carry itself. If sleep comes, it comes gently. If wakefulness stays, it stays gently. The moons remain, circling quietly, keeping time without counting, moving through the dark with no awareness of being heard at all. Distance in space is not empty in the way it sometimes sounds. Between Jupiter and its moons, there is always something moving: particles, fields, light, time. Nothing is truly still, but nothing is crowded either. There is room for motion without friction, for presence without pressure. The moons travel through this space at their own steady speeds. They do not leave trails. They do not disturb one another beyond the gentle exchanges gravity allows. Each orbit fits alongside the others, like slow breaths that never need to synchronize consciously. You don't need to picture the space between them. It can remain abstract, a sense of openness rather than a scene. If this part fades as you hear it, the openness remains. Space does not close when it isn't observed. Astronomers sometimes describe the Jovian system as a miniature solar system of its own, a large central body, many smaller companions, shared rules, repeated patterns. This comparison isn't meant to elevate or dramatize anything. It's simply a way of noticing scale. The same principles apply whether something is large or small, whether it is watched closely or rarely at all. If the idea of scale feels distant or heavy, you don't need to follow it. Scale has no expectations. Large systems do not ask to be comprehended. Eo's volcanoes release material into space, forming a thin cloud that follows the moon along its orbit. This material becomes part of Jupiter's environment, feeding faint rings and glowing arcs of plasma. The process is continuous and slow: eruption, release, dispersal. Nothing accumulates dramatically. Nothing ends abruptly. You don't need to imagine fire or motion. You can let it remain as a quiet exchange matter moving from one place to another, thinning as it goes. If this detail slips away, it leaves no absence behind. Europa's surface reflects sunlight softly, brighter than most moons. From far away, it looks calm and uniform. Only when examined closely do the fractures appear. This is often how change works on long timescales. From a distance, things seem steady. Up close, there is quiet adjustment everywhere. You don't need to decide which view is more real. Both exist at once. If your attention drifts between them, that's natural. Europa's orbit carries it repeatedly through Jupiter's radiation environment. Particles strike the ice, altering its chemistry subtly. New compounds form, old ones change. These changes do not announce themselves. They happen molecule by molecule over years and centuries. Nothing about them demands notice. If this becomes too small to hold in mind, you can let it go. The ice continues its quiet chemistry without needing awareness. Ganymede's gravity is strong enough to influence its surroundings in a gentle way. Small particles curve slightly as they pass. Fields bend and adjust. These influences are measured carefully, not felt directly. They are known through patience rather than sensation. You don't need to imagine force or pull. It's enough to know that presence itself can shape nearby space, even quietly. If this thought dissolves, it does so without consequence. Ganymede's surface shows signs of tectonic movement in ice rather than rock. Large plates have shifted, cracked, and rejoined over time. The patterns are slow and broad. There is no sense of urgency in them, no sharp boundaries, just gradual rearrangement. If your mind feels like it's rearranging itself now, that's okay. Thoughts drift, separate, rejoin, and settle without instruction. Callisto's orbit is nearly circular, far enough from Jupiter to avoid strong tidal heating. This distance grants it a kind of quiet independence. It moves without being squeezed, without being reshaped. Its internal temperature remains low and stable. There is calm in that kind of distance, not isolation, just space enough to remain unchanged. You don't need to relate this to anything else. Distance does not need metaphor. It simply is. Some of Jupiter's outer moons take many years to complete a single orbit. Their motion is so slow that it barely registers from one moment to the next. Time stretches there, days pass, years pass, the orbit continues. You don't need to track this slowness. It exists regardless of measurement. Slow things do not require patience from observers. Jupiter's faint ring system is fed by dust from its inner moons. Tiny particles escape weak gravity and spread out. The rings are thin, nearly invisible. They do not dominate the view. They do not shine brightly. They exist quietly, only noticeable when light strikes them just right. If this image never fully forms, that's fine. Not everything needs to be seen clearly to exist. Sometimes multiple moons align along the same line of sight. From far away, they appear briefly close together, then separate again. These alignments are temporary and predictable. They do not change the moons themselves, they only change how they appear. You don't need to remember this. Appearances shift constantly, without altering underlying motion. The Jovian system has existed in roughly this form for billions of years. Orbits have adjusted slightly, surfaces have changed, but the overall pattern remains. Longevity does not mean stagnation. It simply means that change happens slowly enough to feel gentle. If you're feeling the softness of time now, you don't need to hold on to it. It will continue whether noticed or not. Jupiter turns beneath its moons, clouds flowing, storms forming and fading. The great red spot has persisted for centuries, shrinking and changing shape without disappearing. The moons watch this silently, orbit after orbit. They do not respond. They do not react. You don't need to think about storms or weather. The idea that something can persist while slowly changing is enough, and even that is optional. As your awareness moves, slows, or drifts, nothing here requires adjustment. The moons do not need attention to remain in motion. They do not need memory to remain real. Whether you are listening closely or barely at all, Jupiter's moons continue their quiet paths, balanced between presence and distance, carrying on in the dark without any need to be noticed. From far away, the motions of Jupiter's moons can look almost still. Their orbits are so large, their periods so long, that change is difficult to notice moment by moment. Only with patience does movement reveal itself a slight shift, a slow return, a repeated position after many days have passed. This kind of motion doesn't invite anticipation. There's nothing to wait for, nothing to resolve. The moons simply continue, tracing paths that have become familiar to gravity itself. If your awareness drifts here, that's perfectly natural. Slow movement doesn't insist on being followed. It's content to unfold whether it's noticed or not. Astronomers often describe orbits as balances between falling and missing. A moon is always falling toward Jupiter, but always moving sideways enough to never arrive. This balance is not tense, it's not precarious. It has lasted for billions of years. You don't need to picture falling or motion. You can let the idea remain soft that stability can come from continuous adjustment, without strain. If this idea fades, the balance remains intact. Io's orbit is slightly elliptical, bringing it closer to Jupiter at some times than others. This changing distance is what drives much of its internal heat. The moon flexes, compresses, relaxes, not sharply, not abruptly. The surface responds slowly. Volcanic material spreads out and cools. Patterns form, then soften. From a distance, all of this becomes quiet texture. Nothing calls out. Nothing demands attention. If this becomes background noise in your mind, that's okay. Io's activity does not need an audience. Europa's ice reflects sunlight in a way that makes it one of the brightest objects around Jupiter. Its brightness is even and calm, not glaring. It doesn't flicker or flash. That steady light comes from countless small ice grains scattering sunlight gently. Each grain does very little on its own. Together, they create something visible. You don't need to hold on to that explanation. It's enough to know that gentleness can be cumulative, that small things together can create steadiness. If the thought dissolves, the light remains. Europa's surface lines tell of movement without fracture. Ice shifts, slides, and reseals. The moon adjusts rather than breaks. This adjustment happens so slowly that it feels almost timeless. Cracks may take thousands of years to widen and close again. You don't need to imagine that span of time. Your mind doesn't need to stretch that far. Europa carries that duration on its own. Ganymede's size gives it gravity strong enough to hold a thin atmosphere. This atmosphere is extremely faint, mostly oxygen released from ice. It does not feel like air. It does not move in winds. It exists as a whisper around the moon, barely there. You don't need to think of breathing or sky. This atmosphere does not invite those associations. It simply exists, a thin boundary between surface and space. If your thoughts drift upward here, that's fine. Boundaries don't need close attention to hold. Ganymede's orbit lies within Jupiter's powerful magnetic environment. Charged particles spiral along invisible paths, guided quietly by fields. The Moon interacts with this environment without resistance. There is no struggle, no conflict, just coexistence. You don't need to follow how fields work. They are not things to be held or seen. It's enough to know that structure can exist without solidity. Callisto's distance places it near the edge of Jupiter's influence. It feels the planet's gravity, but only gently. Tides are weak. Internal heating is minimal. As a result, Callisto's surface remains largely unchanged. It has not been resurfaced or smoothed. It carries its craters openly. These craters overlap, fade at the edges, and soften with time. They're reminders of events that no longer matter. If this sense of oldness settles into you, you don't need to analyze it. Age here is not loss, it's simply continuation. Some scientists think Callisto may be the most unchanged large object in the solar system, not because it resisted change, but because nothing pushed it strongly enough to transform. There is calm in that neutrality, not being chosen for alteration, not being singled out. You don't need to relate this to anything else. It can remain a distant thought, or fade entirely. Jupiter's outer moons orbit at great distances, some millions of kilometers away. From there, Jupiter appears smaller, less dominant. These moons take years, sometimes decades, to complete a single orbit. Their motion is so slow that it borders on stillness. You don't need to follow their paths. Slow motion doesn't require tracking. These moons are often irregular, shaped more like stones than spheres. Their gravity is weak, their surfaces are rough, and yet they remain bound, captured long ago, held gently ever since. Capture does not have to be violent. It can be gradual, quiet, the result of conditions aligning just once. If this thought passes without settling, that's fine. Alignment doesn't need to be understood to occur. The names of these smaller moons come from many mythologies, but the moons themselves are indifferent to naming. They existed before names and will exist without them. You don't need to remember any of those names. Forgetting does not erase existence. Jupiter's gravity reaches far, shaping the space around it like a shallow bowl. Moons rest within this shape, moving along its curves. This shaping is not rigid. It does not confine. It simply guides. You don't need to visualize the shape. Guidance does not need form to function. As time passes, whether minutes here or millions of years there, the Jovian system remains balanced. Not static, not fragile, just enduring. If your awareness is dimming now, that's welcome. If it's steady, that's welcome too. Nothing here depends on clarity. Jupiter's moons continue, orbit after orbit, quiet and complete. They move through space without intention, without awareness, without need. Whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or not listening at all anymore, their paths remain unchanged, slow, patient, and unconcerned with being noticed. Sometimes the most noticeable thing about Jupiter's moons is how little they ask of the imagination. They are distant enough that detail softens naturally, edges blur, movement stretches out, nothing arrives sharply. This distance can feel restful. You're not expected to picture every surface or hold every fact in place. The moons allow vagueness. They exist comfortably even when only half formed in the mind. If your thoughts drift into something unrelated here, that's fine. The moons do not require your attention to remain whole. Jupiter's gravity well is deep, but it is also smooth. Objects within it move along curves rather than falling straight in. These curves repeat. They don't surprise. A moon completes an orbit, then another, then another. There is no sense of progress or destination, only continuation. You don't need to imagine the full orbit. You can let the idea remain partial, a sense of going around, of returning without needing to arrive. Io's constant flexing generates heat that never fully dissipates. The moon is warm inside, even though it is far from the sun. This warmth is not dramatic. It does not glow outward. It stays contained, moving through rock slowly, emerging only where it finds a path. If this idea fades as you hear it, that's fine. Heat persists whether it's imagined or not. Europa's ice shell acts as a barrier and a bridge at the same time. It separates the surface from the ocean below, but it also connects them through slow movement. Cracks open, material shifts, then everything settles again. This settling is not final, it simply lasts until the next small adjustment. You don't need to track these changes. They happen too slowly to follow moment by moment. Europa holds its own patience. The ocean beneath remains dark and pressurized. Water there does not feel waves in the way surface oceans do. Movement is restrained, guided by the shape of the ice and the pull of gravity. You don't need to imagine motion at all. Stillness and movement overlap here, without conflict. Ganymede's mass gives it a presence that feels grounded, even in space. It is large enough to feel settled. Nothing about it feels temporary. Its orbit is regular, its rotation is locked, its internal layers are arranged and held. You don't need to think about permanence or stability. These words don't add much to what already is. Ganymede continues regardless of description. Callisto's surface is darker than the others, absorbing more light. From afar, it looks muted, understated. It does not reflect attention back. This quality does not make it less. It simply means it does not insist on being seen. If your awareness dims here, Callisto remains unchanged. Darkness does not erase form. The craters on Callisto overlap gently, one softening into the next. Edges blur over time. Sharpness fades. This fading is not loss. It is a kind of smoothing, a release of tension that once existed. You don't need to dwell on impact or violence. What remains now is quiet shape. Jupiter's moons sometimes pass in front of one another from a distant viewpoint. For a short time, one hides another. Then they separate again. Nothing changes for the moons themselves. Only the view shifts. You don't need to remember which moon passes which. Occlusion is temporary. Presence continues. The Jovian system is filled with faint radiation, invisible and constant. The moons exist within it without awareness. Their surfaces respond slowly, altering chemistry at the smallest scales. These changes are subtle enough to be ignored entirely. They don't demand interpretation. If this feels too abstract, you can let it go. Subtle things are content to remain subtle. Spacecraft that visit Jupiter move fast, but the system itself does not react. Moons do not alter their paths. Jupiter does not shift. The visitor passes through, gathers a moment, then leaves. You don't need to imagine the spacecraft at all. The idea that brief presence doesn't disturb long rhythms is enough, and even that is optional. Some of Jupiter's moons are thought to be remnants of collisions long past, fragments that found stable orbits instead of dispersing. These fragments do not remember their origins. They simply exist as they are now. You don't need to trace histories here. The present form is complete without explanation. Jupiter's gravity shapes time as well as space. Orbits define days and years for each moon. These timescales differ widely. On some moons, a day lasts longer than many days on Earth. On others, years pass slowly. You don't need to convert or compare. Time here does not need translation. If your sense of time feels softened now, that fits naturally. Slow systems invite that feeling. The Sun is distant at Jupiter's orbit, appearing smaller and dimmer. Light arrives gently. Shadows are softer. The moons receive enough energy to be visible, but not enough to dominate. You don't need to picture brightness or dimness. Just the idea of moderated light is enough. Jupiter's clouds shift and flow beneath the moons, never quite repeating. The moons pass overhead, unchanged by what happens below. This separation is not distance alone, it is difference in timescale. Weather changes quickly, orbits do not. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without commentary. As your awareness continues to wander, or rest, or hover somewhere in between, nothing here asks for correction. The Jovian system does not speed up when watched. It does not slow when ignored. It simply continues orbit after orbit, quiet and sufficient. If you are still listening, you're welcome. If you're barely listening, you're welcome. And if listening has faded almost entirely, Jupiter's moons are still moving steady, patient, and unconcerned with whether they are noticed at all. There is a certain comfort in knowing that Jupiter's moons do not interact with one another very often. They share space, but they keep respectful distances. Their paths are well spaced, their motions predictable. Nothing crowds, nothing interrupts. This spacing is not accidental. It is the result of long adjustment, of orbits finding places where they do not interfere. Over immense spans of time, anything unstable has already changed. What remains is what works quietly. You don't need to imagine the past chaos. You can rest in the present calm. The moons now move without negotiation, each one following a path that no longer needs revision. Jupiter's pull is strongest close in and weaker farther out. This creates a gradient of influence that the moons settle into naturally. Closer moons feel more warmth, more flexing. Farther moons feel less. There is no preference in this arrangement. No moon is favoured or neglected. Each one simply occupies the place that matches its history and mass. If your mind wanders here, that's natural. Balance does not ask to be watched. Io's surface colours come from sulfur and sulfur dioxide spread thinly across the ground. These materials change form as temperature shifts slightly. They move, settle, and reappear elsewhere. From a great distance, the details blur. Io becomes a small, warm point, moving along its orbit with quiet regularity. You don't need to picture colour or texture. You can let Io remain a presence rather than an image. If that presence fades, the moon remains. Europa's brightness makes it stand out against the dark background of space. It reflects light evenly, without harsh contrast. This gives it a calm, almost gentle appearance, even from afar. The fractures on its surface form patterns that repeat without symmetry. Lines curve, branch, and reconnect. There is no central design. This lack of a single pattern can feel restful. Nothing to solve, nothing to complete. If your attention drifts across these lines without settling, that's exactly enough. Ganymede's gravity creates a sense of weight, even though it is suspended in space. It holds onto material more firmly than most moons. Dust settles, ice stays where it forms. This retention gives Ganymede a layered quality, both physically and visually. Old surfaces remain alongside newer ones. You don't need to remember which regions are older or younger. Time there is not organized for memory. It simply accumulates. Callisto's darker surface absorbs sunlight rather than reflecting it. This gives it a subdued presence, less noticeable unless you look closely. Absorbing does not mean disappearing. It simply means not sending much back. If you feel yourself absorbing words now, rather than responding to them, that's welcome. Not everything needs reflection. The craters on Callisto vary widely in size. Some are small and faint, others are vast, spanning hundreds of kilometers. Each one represents an impact that is no longer happening. What remains is shape without force. You don't need to imagine the collisions. The energy has long since dissipated. only the quiet record remains. Jupiter's inner moons move through regions where charged particles spiral along magnetic paths. These particles strike surfaces gently over time, altering them bit by bit. This process is slow and cumulative. No single particle matters. Together, they make small changes that add up. You don't need to track these changes. They happen beneath notice. The outer moons move in regions where Jupiter's influence is weaker. Their space feels more open, less structured. These moons take long, looping paths, sometimes tilted far from Jupiter's equator. Their orbits are less orderly, but still stable. Order does not always mean neatness. Stability does not require symmetry. If this thought drifts away, nothing is lost. The moons keep their paths regardless. Jupiter's ring system is faint enough that it's often overlooked. It does not dominate images. It does not announce itself. The rings are composed of dust, continuously replenished by small impacts on inner moons. Dust spreads, thins, and eventually escapes. There is no moment when the rings are complete or incomplete. They simply exist in a steady state of coming and going. You don't need to picture the rings at all. Their faintness allows them to remain in the background. Occasionally, a moon passes directly through Jupiter's shadow. For a while, it receives no sunlight at all. Then, just as gradually, light returns. The temperature changes are small. The event is gentle. You don't need to imagine darkness or light. The idea of gradual dimming and brightening is enough. Astronomers can predict these shadow crossings with great accuracy. They know when a moon will enter shadow and when it will leave. This predictability does not make the events less real. It simply makes them calmer. If your thoughts fade during this idea, that's fine. Predictable things do not need attention to persist. The Jovian system has been observed for centuries, but it has existed far longer than that. Human observation is brief compared to orbital time. The moons didn't begin moving when they were first seen. They did not change when names were given. You don't need to hold on to the idea of observation at all. The system does not depend on being witnessed. Jupiter's immense mass shapes the paths of passing objects, deflecting comets and asteroids. Sometimes this protects the inner solar system. Sometimes it redirects material inward. These effects unfold over millions of years. There is no urgency in them. You don't need to consider cause and effect here. Long timescales soften responsibility. As your awareness continues to soften or drift, nothing here asks you to stay engaged. The moons are complete without understanding. They move through space in slow, repeated arcs, indifferent to attention, memory, or meaning. If you're still awake, you're keeping company with something steady. If you're drifting towards sleep, that steadiness continues without you. Jupiter's moons remain, orbit after orbit, balanced, quiet, and whole, moving gently through the dark, unconcerned with whether they are noticed, and content simply to be where they are. Over long stretches of time, Jupiter's moons settle into patterns that feel almost like habits, not decisions, not intentions, just motions repeated so often that they no longer change. Each orbit leaves a trace only in memory and mathematics, not in space itself. Nothing wears down, nothing accumulates friction. The path is followed again as if it were new, every time. If you notice yourself replaying thoughts in a similar way, that's okay. Repetition does not mean being stuck. It can simply mean continuing. The inner moons experience tides raised by Jupiter's gravity, stretching and compressing them slightly. This stretching is rhythmic, returning again and again to the same gentle range. No tearing, no collapse. It's a reminder that even solid things can yield a little without breaking, that flexibility does not require fragility. You don't need to imagine rock bending or ice flexing. You can let the idea remain a feeling rather than a picture, yielding, then returning. Europa's cracks do not widen forever. They open, shift, and then close again as the Moon moves along its orbit. Ice refreezes, surfaces reseal. This cycle has no end point. It doesn't lead anywhere. It simply happens as long as the orbit continues. If your thoughts open and close in a similar way, that fits naturally here. Nothing needs to stay open. Nothing needs to be resolved. Ganymede's magnetic field creates small regions of shelter where charged particles are redirected. These regions move with the Moon, always relative, never fixed. Shelter here is not a place, it's a condition, a pattern of forces aligning briefly. You don't need to picture protection or boundaries. It's enough to know that even in harsh environments, there can be pockets of calm. If this idea drifts away, the calm remains. Callisto's distance from Jupiter means that it feels fewer disturbances. Its orbit is wide and even. The Moon moves as if unhurried, unconcerned with what happens closer in. That distance is not isolation. Callisto is still part of the system. It simply experiences it differently. You don't need to relate this to anything personal. Distance here is neutral, just a fact of position. Some of Jupiter's moons are thought to be rubble piles, collections of rock held together loosely by gravity. They're not solid in the way planets are. They are aggregates, balanced gently. This structure allows them to absorb impacts without shattering. Energy spreads through many small contacts instead of concentrating. You don't need to imagine stones or fragments. You can let the idea remain abstract that looseness can sometimes be strength. The orbits of these smaller moons can change slightly over time, nudged by interactions and distant influences. But these changes are gradual, almost imperceptible. There is no sudden shift, no dramatic rearrangement, just a slow settling into a new version of the same pattern. If your awareness feels like it's shifting slowly now, that's fitting. Change does not need to announce itself. Jupiter's shadow is immense, stretching far into space. When a moon enters it, sunlight fades gradually. The temperature drops slightly, then, just as slowly, light returns. This transition is predictable and gentle. There is no shock, no sharp boundary. You don't need to imagine darkness. You can let it remain as a soft dimming, like the closing of the eyes that are already tired. The moons do not react to these eclipses. They do not speed up or slow down. They simply continue their motion, indifferent to light or shadow. If your own awareness dims and brightens in cycles, that's welcome. Nothing here needs constant clarity. Jupiter's atmosphere moves beneath the moons, clouds flowing in bands that circle the planet. Storms form, stretch, and dissolve. The great red spot changes shape slowly, never quite the same, never entirely gone. The moons pass overhead, unchanged by these movements. They are not affected by weather. They exist on a different timescale. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without conflict. The sun's light reaches Jupiter weakened by distance. Shadows are softer, highlights are muted. This subdued lighting gives the entire system a calm quality. Nothing is harsh, nothing is overly bright. If this softness settles into you, you don't need to notice it happening. Light adjusts without instruction. Jupiter's moons have been visited by only a handful of spacecraft. Most of what is known comes from distant observation, from patience. Even close flybys last only moments. Then the spacecraft moves on, leaving the moons exactly as they were. You don't need to imagine the machines at all. The idea that brief contact does not disturb long stability is enough, and even that is optional. Some moons show signs of having shifted their orbits slightly in the distant past. Resonances formed, interactions occurred. But those moments are over. What remains is the outcome-stable paths that no longer change much. You don't need to trace how things arrived here. The present configuration is complete without explanation. Jupiter's gravitational influence extends far, shaping the trajectories of passing objects, Comets bend, asteroids deflect. These interactions are slow and rare. They unfold over spans far longer than a human lifetime. You don't need to think about protection or danger. Long timescales soften urgency. As your attention continues to wander, rest, or fade, nothing in this system responds. The moons do not pause, they do not accelerate. They simply continue, orbit after orbit, following paths that have been steady for longer than memory. If you are awake, you're sharing space with something enduring. If you're drifting towards sleep, that endurance remains without you. Jupiter's moons keep moving through the dark, not striving, not resting, just continuing complete and untroubled, unconcerned with whether they are noticed at all. There is a quiet reassurance in how little effort Jupiter's moons seem to require. They do not correct their paths from moment to moment. They do not hesitate. They simply follow curves that have been shaped for them by mass and time. Once an orbit settles, it becomes almost effortless. Energy is conserved. Motion is maintained. Nothing needs to be added. If you find yourself settling into stillness here, or drifting without direction, that fits easily alongside this kind of motion. Continuation does not always look active. Io's internal warmth is maintained by constant but gentle flexing. The moon is never entirely relaxed, but it is never strained either. Its interior adjusts continuously, absorbing and releasing energy in a slow rhythm. This rhythm does not build toward anything, it does not crescendo, it simply repeats. You don't need to imagine heat or movement clearly. You can let it remain a quiet sense of internal motion, something happening without urgency. If that sense fades, the process continues regardless. Europa's surface ice behaves almost like a skin rather than a shell. It stretches, cracks, and heals, not once, but endlessly. Each crack tells of motion that is already over. Each smooth region marks a place where ice flowed and then rested. There is no final surface. There is only the current one, held briefly before the next small adjustment. If your thoughts feel fluid here, shifting shape without settling, that belongs naturally. Europa does not insist on permanence. Ganymede's bulk gives it a certain quiet authority. It is large enough to feel settled in its place. Nothing pushes it easily. Its orbit is wide and even. Its rotation is slow and locked. Its internal layers are arranged and held by gravity that does not waver. You don't need to think of strength or weight. Those words don't add much. Ganymede simply continues as it is. Callisto's orbit carries it through regions of space that feel less crowded by Jupiter's influence. The moon moves as if given room to remain unchanged. It does not experience the same internal stirring as the inner moons. Its interior stays cold and quiet. This lack of stirring is not absence. It is simply a different condition. If your own mind feels quiet now, not searching for stimulation, that fits easily here. Callisto does not ask for engagement. The smaller moons closer to Jupiter experience subtle variations in their paths. Tiny gravitational nudges occur as moons pass one another. These nudges are small enough to be absorbed without disruption. Over time, such interactions average out. The system remains stable. You don't need to imagine calculations or corrections. Stability here emerges naturally, without planning. Farther out, the irregular moons follow orbits that feel almost hesitant when compared to the inner ones. Their paths tilt and stretch, their speeds vary, and yet they return. They complete their long arcs and come back around. Irregular does not mean unreliable, it simply means shaped by a different history. If this distinction slips past unnoticed, nothing is lost. The moons continue regardless. Jupiter's shadow moves through space like a wide, soft cone. When a moon enters it, the change is gradual. Light fades, temperature drops slightly. There is no sudden darkness, no abrupt transition. Then, just as gently, light returns. The moon resumes reflecting sunlight as if nothing happened. You don't need to imagine these changes. The idea of gradual transitions is enough, and even that is optional. Jupiter's rings, made of dust, are constantly changing and yet always present. Particles escape. New ones join. There is no single ring particle that matters. The ring exists as a pattern rather than a collection. If your attention feels similarly diffuse now, not focused on any one thing, that fits. Patterns do not require sharp focus. From Earth, Jupiter's moons appear as points of light, visible through even small telescopes. They move slowly from night to night, changing positions relative to the planet. This movement was once enough to challenge ideas about the universe. Now, it is simply observed. You don't need to hold on to history here. The moons move whether they are revolutionary or ordinary. Sometimes one moon passes behind Jupiter and disappears from view entirely. For a while, it cannot be seen at all. Then it reappears on the other side. During that time, nothing has happened to it. It has not stopped. It has not changed. Visibility is not existence. If parts of this narration disappear from your awareness, nothing has gone wrong. Presence does not depend on being noticed. Jupiter's moons experience days and nights defined by their orbits and rotations. These cycles are slow and regular. There is no sudden sunrise, no abrupt sunset. Light increases and decreases gradually. You don't need to imagine standing on a surface. You can let the idea of cycles pass without form. The temperature variations on these moons are muted by distance from the sun. Extremes are softened. Change is gradual. This moderation contributes to the overall calm of the system. Nothing here is sharp, nothing is abrupt. If your own sensations feel softened now, that fits naturally. The Jovian system does not progress toward an ending. It does not build toward a conclusion. It simply continues. Orbits repeat, surfaces change slowly, gravity holds. You don't need to stay with this. You don't need to remember it. Whether you're listening closely, drifting in and out, or no longer listening at all, Jupiter's moons continue their quiet motion steady, balanced, and complete, moving through the dark without effort, without awareness, and without any need to be noticed. There is something gently reassuring about how Jupiter's moons never hurry. They do not anticipate what comes next. They do not prepare. Each moment of motion is enough on its own, complete without reference to what came before or what will follow. An orbit is not a journey with a destination. It is a condition, a way of being in motion that does not require arrival. The moon is always where it needs to be, simply by continuing. If your thoughts feel less linear now, less interested in where they're going, that fits easily here. Not everything needs a next step. Io's surface is constantly renewed, but never all at once. Lava spreads thinly, cools, and becomes part of the ground. Older surfaces are covered gently, not erased. This layering happens quietly, without urgency. Nothing announces itself as new or old. From far away, Io remains the same small shape, moving along its orbit as it always has. You don't need to imagine activity as noise or intensity. Activity here is just continuation, one state easing into another. If that idea slips away, the process continues untroubled. Europa's ice shell responds to stress by flowing rather than shattering. Under pressure, ice behaves slowly, almost patiently. It bends, creeps, and then rests again. This behavior is neither strong nor weak. It is simply what ice does under the right conditions. Cracks form, shift, and seal. Surfaces smooth themselves over time. If your own thoughts feel less rigid now, more able to drift and reform, that belongs naturally in this space. Europa does not insist on sharp boundaries. The ocean beneath Europa's ice is shielded from space, from radiation, from sudden change. It exists in darkness and pressure, moving gently, stirred only by slow tides. This ocean does not need to be imagined as vast or mysterious. It can simply be water, held in place, enduring quietly. If this idea feels distant or vague, that's fine. Distance softens things without diminishing them. Ganymede's interior structure gives it a sense of depth that does not change quickly. Layers remain where they are. Heat moves slowly. Its surface records both ancient stillness and gentle resurfacing. Old regions remain beside newer ones, without conflict. Time there does not sort itself neatly. It overlaps. You don't need to keep track of which parts are which. Ganymede carries its own complexity without explanation. Callisto's surface tells a simpler story, though not a smaller one. Crater after crater rests quietly in place. Edges soften, details blur. The energy that formed them is long gone. What remains is shape without force. This kind of quiet record does not ask to be read. It simply exists. If your awareness is thinning now, that fits easily alongside Callisto's stillness. Nothing here needs sharpening. Jupiter's smaller inner moons move through regions shaped strongly by gravity and radiation. Their surfaces respond slowly to these conditions. Atoms shift, molecules rearrange. These changes are subtle enough to be almost invisible. No single moment matters. You don't need to follow these processes. Small things can happen without needing attention. The irregular outer moons feel farther removed from Jupiter's presence. Their orbits tilt and stretch, tracing long, looping paths. They were likely captured long ago, not born where they are now, but that history does not weigh on them. Capture does not imply struggle here. It simply means finding a place where motion could continue. If this thought drifts away before it settles, nothing is lost. The moons continue regardless. Jupiter's rings remain faint and nearly invisible, existing more as suggestion than structure. Dust spreads thinly, reflecting just enough light to be noticed. Particles come and go, the ring remains. There is no beginning or end to this process, just exchange. If your attention feels similarly dispersed now, not anchored to any single point, that fits naturally. Diffuse things do not need focus. From Earth, the movements of Jupiter's moons can be followed night after night. They shift positions slowly, predictably. Once, these movements challenge deeply held ideas. Now, they are simply part of what is known. You don't need to hold on to history or significance. The moons move whether they are meaningful or ordinary. Sometimes a moon disappears behind Jupiter's vast body. For a time, it cannot be seen at all. Then it emerges again, unchanged. Nothing about its absence altered its path. Nothing about its return required effort. If parts of this narration fade from awareness, that mirrors this disappearance. Nothing has stopped. Nothing needs to return deliberately. Jupiter's gravitational influence reaches far beyond its visible disk. Space itself is gently shaped by its mass. Moons rest within this shaping, following curves that feel natural rather than imposed. You don't need to picture the shape of gravity. Guidance does not need form to exist. The Jovian system has no center of attention. No single moon dominates the others. Each follows its own rhythm, compatible with the rest. This compatibility did not require design. It emerged slowly, over time. If your thoughts feel less centered now, less focused on one thing, that fits. Balance does not require a focal point. Light continues to arrive from the sun, weakened by distance. It illuminates surfaces softly, without glare. Shadows are long and gentle, transitions are gradual. If your inner landscape feels dimmer or softer now, that is not a loss. It is simply a change in lighting. The moons do not respond to being observed. They do not alter their motion when watched. They do not pause when ignored. They are complete without interaction. Whether you are listening closely, drifting in and out, or resting somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, Jupiter's moons continue their steady motion unhurried, balanced and unconcerned, carrying on through the dark with no need for attention, no need for memory, and no need for anything at all. As time moves forward, whether noticed or not, Jupiter's moons remain patient with it. They do not resist change, and they do not chase it. They allow time to pass through them, shaping surfaces slowly, adjusting motions gently. This patience is not something they choose. It is simply how large systems behave when nothing pushes them too hard. Momentum carries on, balance holds. If your sense of time feels less sharp now, less segmented into moments, that fits naturally here. Time does not need edges to exist. Eo's eruptions send material briefly upward before it falls back or drifts away. Nothing escapes dramatically. Nothing accumulates dangerously. The surface receives these materials and incorporates them without comment. Fresh layers spread thinly, cooling, becoming part of what was already there. From afar, Io remains the same familiar point of motion, its activity softened by distance. You don't need to imagine the eruptions as events. They are processes ongoing, unremarkable in their repetition. If that idea fades, the repetition continues. Europa's ice shell reflects light in a way that smooths contrast. Edges are softened, transitions are gentle. This surface does not announce its complexity at first glance. Only patient observation reveals the patterns beneath. You don't need to observe patiently here. Europa does not require it. Its surface holds its quiet intricacy without needing recognition. Beneath that ice, the ocean remains sealed away from space. Pressure keeps it liquid. Darkness keeps it unchanged. There are no waves breaking, no tides rushing. Movement, if present, is restrained and slow. You don't need to imagine water at all. The idea of containment is enough, something held gently, neither frozen nor free. Ganymede's magnetic environment interacts with Jupiter's in subtle ways. Invisible boundaries shift slightly as conditions change. These shifts do not disturb the moon's motion, they simply exist alongside it. You don't need to follow invisible things. They do not require attention to function. Ganymede's surface shows regions where ice has moved and refrozen, smoothing older terrain. These changes happened long ago and may not be happening now. Time there does not need to be current to be real. Past motion leaves a present shape. If your thoughts drift backward or lose their sense of now, that belongs easily here. The present does not need constant reinforcement. Callisto's surface absorbs sunlight quietly, warming only slightly before releasing that energy again. Temperature changes are small and slow. Nothing expands or contracts abruptly. Nothing reacts sharply. This moderation contributes to Callisto's overall calm. It exists in a kind of thermal balance that does not fluctuate much. If your own sensations feel muted now, that fits naturally. Not everything needs to be intense. Jupiter's inner moons move through regions where charged particles are more abundant. Over time, these particles alter surface materials subtly. Atoms rearrange, molecules shift. These changes are not visible moment to moment. They accumulate slowly, below notice. You don't need to follow these processes. Subtlety does not need supervision. The outer moons move through quieter regions of space. There, Jupiter's influence is gentler, spread thinly across distance. Their orbits are wide and slow. Each one takes years to complete a single path. Slowness here does not mean inefficiency, it simply means scale. If your thoughts are moving slowly now or not moving much at all, that fits. Slow motion does not need justification. Jupiter's faint rings remain barely visible, their dust particles reflecting just enough light to be detected. They do not form sharp edges. They do not dominate. Dust is added and lost continuously. The ring remains through this exchange. You don't need to picture the particles. The idea of persistence through change is enough, and even that is optional. Occasionally, a moon passes through Jupiter's shadow and experiences a brief night. The transition is smooth. Light fades gradually, then returns. There is no sense of interruption. The orbit continues uninterrupted. If your awareness dims and brightens in similar cycles, that is welcome. Nothing here expects consistency. From Earth, Jupiter's moons can be seen changing positions over successive nights. This movement is slow enough to feel reassuring rather than dramatic. Once, such motion challenged old assumptions. Now, it is simply part of the sky's quiet behavior. You don't need to hold on to significance or discovery. Ordinariness is enough. Jupiter's gravity shapes the space around it into gentle curves. Moons follow these curves without effort. There is no tension in this guidance, no struggle to stay in place. You don't need to imagine being guided. Guidance here is simply the absence of resistance. As your awareness continues to soften, or drift, or rest somewhere in between, nothing in the Jovian system responds. The moons do not need to be noticed. They do not need to be understood. They continue their steady motion through the dark, orbit after orbit, complete in themselves, patient, balanced, and untroubled, carrying on quietly whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. The longer one stays with Jupiter's moons, the more they begin to feel like background rather than subject. Not something to focus on, but something to exist alongside. They don't pull attention forward. They don't recede dramatically either. They simply remain present in a way that doesn't ask to be noticed. This kind of presence is easy to share space with. It doesn't compete with thoughts. It doesn't interrupt rest. If your awareness drifts gently beside it, that is enough. Jupiter's gravity holds the moons in paths that do not tighten or loosen noticeably. Their distances change slightly, rhythmically, but never abruptly. Each orbit returns to a familiar shape. There is no need for correction, no sense of imbalance. If you feel yourself settling into a similar rhythm now not fixed, not drifting away that fits naturally here, balance does not require effort once it's found. Io's interior warmth circulates slowly, moving heat through rock that responds over long spans of time. Nothing spikes, nothing collapses. The moon is neither cooling rapidly nor overheating. It remains in a steady state of internal motion, held there by gravitational interaction that repeats endlessly. You don't need to imagine this heat as sensation. It's enough to know that warmth can exist quietly, without being felt. If this idea slips away, the warmth remains. Europa's ice shell continues to adjust in response to tides. Each orbit brings a slight stretch, a slight release. The ice responds by flowing just enough to prevent stress from building. This response is automatic, not reactive. It does not require decision or timing. If your own thoughts feel like they're loosening and tightening without direction, that fits easily alongside Europa's motion. Adjustment does not need intention. The ocean beneath Europa remains insulated from the surface. Pressure and temperature keep it stable. It does not freeze, and it does not boil. It exists in a narrow, quiet range that allows it to persist. You don't need to imagine movement or life or activity. The idea of persistence alone is enough, and even that is optional. Ganymede's mass gives it a sense of completeness. It does not feel provisional. It does not feel temporary. Its orbit is settled. Its rotation is steady. Its internal structure is layered and held. You don't need to think of this as permanence. Nothing here claims to last forever. It simply lasts now, and now is enough. Callisto's surface remains largely unchanged by internal forces. It experiences little tidal heating. Its interior stays cold and quiet. The craters on its surface soften slowly as micrometeorites strike and erode edges over immense spans of time. Change occurs, but so slowly that it feels almost like stillness. If your mind feels similarly still now, not sharply focused, not actively drifting, that belongs here. Stillness does not need explanation. The smaller moons nearer to Jupiter travel through regions shaped strongly by gravity and radiation. Their surfaces alter at the smallest scales, molecule by molecule. These changes are cumulative, not dramatic. They do not announce themselves. You don't need to follow these details. Small-scale change does not require attention. Farther out, the irregular moons trace paths that feel more relaxed, less constrained. Their orbits tilt and stretch, but they return reliably. They do not rush through space. They take long, looping routes that feel almost leisurely. If your awareness is looping gently now, circling rather than progressing, that fits naturally. Progress is not required here. Jupiter's rings remain faint and understated. They do not form a sharp boundary or a bright display. They exist as a suggestion dust suspended in orbit, reflecting just enough light to be detected. Particles are added and lost continuously. The ring persists through this quiet exchange. You don't need to visualize the ring at all. Its faintness allows it to remain in the background. Occasionally, Jupiter's moons line up in ways that briefly change how they appear from afar. One passes in front of another, a shadow crosses a surface. These alignments are temporary and predictable. They do not alter the moons themselves. If your attention shifts briefly and then returns, or doesn't return at all, that mirrors these alignments. Nothing essential changes. The sun's light arrives at Jupiter softened by distance. It does not overwhelm, it illuminates without urgency. Shadows stretch gently across surfaces, highlights are muted. If your inner experience feels similarly softened now, that fits easily here. Light does not need to be intense to be present. Jupiter's clouds flow beneath the moons, forming bands and storms that change more quickly than the orbits above them. Weather comes and goes, the moons continue unchanged. This difference in timescale creates a quiet separation. Fast change below, slow continuity above. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that pass through the Jovian system do so briefly, borrowing speed from gravity and moving on. They observe, measure, and leave. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their motion. They do not acknowledge the passing presence. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly noticed, then gone, that is enough. Nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity extends far into space, shaping trajectories gently rather than forcing them. Moons follow these curves without resistance. There is no sense of being held tightly, only of being guided. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion continues naturally. As awareness softens further, or rests, or fades into something less defined, the Jovian system remains unchanged. The moons continue their steady paths. They do not wait. They do not hurry. Whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all, Jupiter's moons keep moving quiet, balanced, and complete orbit after orbit, through the dark, with no need for attention and no need for anything beyond simply continuing. With enough time, even the idea of motion becomes gentle. Jupiter's moons move, but they do so without emphasis. Nothing accelerates suddenly. Nothing pauses. Motion is simply the state they exist in, like a background hum that never rises or falls. This kind of motion doesn't demand tracking. You don't need to follow where a moon has been or where it will go next. It's enough to know that it is moving and that the movement is stable. If your thoughts feel similarly untracked now, not quite focused, not quite absent that fits easily here, not everything needs to be monitored. Io's surface reshapes itself through many small changes rather than singular events. Heat rises, material spreads, and then cools. The process repeats, slowly smoothing transitions between states. No single eruption defines the moon. It is the accumulation that matters, and even that does not need attention. From a distance, Io remains recognizable, familiar in outline. Activity does not disturb its overall calm. You don't need to imagine color or motion. You can let Io remain a sense of presence, warm, active, yet contained. If that sense fades, nothing about the moon changes. Europa's surface carries lines that curve gently rather than cutting sharply. They form networks rather than divisions. The ice has moved, but it has not fractured into chaos. These patterns emerge over time, shaped by repeated stress and release. Nothing happens all at once. If your thoughts feel like they're branching and reconnecting rather than following a straight line, that belongs naturally here. Europa's surface does not insist on linearity. Beneath the ice, the ocean remains shielded from the surface environment. Radiation does not reach it directly. Temperature stays within a narrow range. This insulation allows the ocean to persist without disturbance. It does not respond to every change above it. You don't need to imagine the ocean in detail. It can remain a quiet idea, something held, protected, and ongoing. Ganymede's size allows it to hold on to its structure with ease. It does not shift quickly. It does not respond dramatically to external influence. Its orbit is wide and steady. Its rotation is synchronized. Its internal layers remain arranged and balanced. You don't need to think of this as stability or strength. Those words are unnecessary. Ganymede simply continues in its present form. Callisto's distance from Jupiter gives it a sense of spaciousness. It moves along a broad path, feeling little internal strain. The moon's surface reflects its long history openly. Craters overlap and soften, recording events that no longer matter. If your awareness feels distant now, not sharply engaged, that fits easily alongside Callisto's quiet presence. Distance does not diminish reality. The smaller moons closer to Jupiter experience stronger gravitational gradients. Their paths are precise, but not fragile. They return again and again to familiar positions. Tiny variations occur, but they are absorbed into the system without disruption. You don't need to imagine these adjustments. Systems can maintain balance without conscious correction. Farther out, the irregular moons follow paths that are less tidy, but no less reliable. Their orbits tilt and stretch, but they remain bound. These moons take long routes through space, completing a single orbit over many years. Their motion is so slow that it feels almost suspended. If your thoughts are lingering without direction now, that fits. Slow paths do not need destinations. Jupiter's rings remain faint, composed of dust that is constantly replenished and lost. They do not form a rigid structure. They exist as a diffuse presence. Particles drift outward, then disappear. Others take their place. You don't need to imagine the particles at all. The idea of continuity through exchange is enough, and even that is optional. Sometimes, a moon passes directly behind Jupiter and vanishes from view. For a while, it is hidden completely. Then it emerges again, unchanged. This disappearance does not interrupt its orbit. Nothing has stopped. Nothing needs to resume. If parts of this narration slip out of awareness that mirrors this motion, presence does not require visibility. The sun's light reaches Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates without glare. Shadows stretch gently across surfaces. This moderated light gives the entire system a subdued tone. Nothing is harsh, nothing demands attention. If your inner experience feels similarly softened now, that belongs here. Brightness is not required. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, flowing in bands that change from day to day. Storms appear, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected by these changes. They exist on a different rhythm. You don't need to compare these timescales. Fast and slow coexist naturally. Spacecraft that have visited Jupiter do so briefly, gathering data and moving on. Their presence does not alter the system. The moons continue as they always have. You don't need to imagine the machines or their paths. The idea that brief observation does not disturb long stability is enough. Jupiter's gravity extends far beyond its visible clouds, shaping space gently rather than forcefully. Moons follow these curves without resistance. There is no sense of being pulled tightly, only of being guided. You don't need to picture guidance. Motion here is simply the absence of resistance. As your awareness continues to drift, soften, or rest in place, nothing in the Jovian system responds. The moons do not slow, they do not speed up. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, unhurried and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. Over time, the distinction between one orbit and the next becomes almost meaningless. Jupiter's moons do not mark milestones. They do not note anniversaries. Each passage around the planet is much like the last, and much like the next. This sameness is not monotony. It is reliability, a kind of quiet promise that nothing sudden will be required. If your thoughts feel repetitive now, circling familiar ideas without needing to resolve them, that belongs naturally here. Repetition can be a form of rest. Io continues to release heat through its surface, but the process has no climax. Eruptions occur, material spreads, and then settles. The surface accepts these changes without resistance. Over long spans, the details blur together, from far away. Io is simply there, a small warm moon moving along a stable path. You don't need to imagine individual eruptions. The accumulation is enough, and even that does not need attention. If this idea fades, the process continues unchanged. Europa's ice shell remains bright and smooth from a distance. Only close inspection reveals its complexity. Lines cross and curve, recording motion that is already finished. The ice does not hurry to change. It responds slowly, flowing just enough to release stress. If your own thoughts feel like they are easing rather than pushing forward, that fits easily here. Europa does not insist on urgency. The ocean beneath Europa's ice remains isolated from the surface. Pressure and temperature keep it liquid, but restrained. It does not interact directly with space. This separation allows it to persist quietly, unchanged by surface events. You don't need to imagine depth or darkness. The idea of insulation is enough, something protected from disturbance. Ganymede's gravity shapes its surface gently over time. Ice flows slowly, smoothing some regions while leaving others untouched. The result is a surface that carries multiple eras at once. Nothing is erased. Nothing is fully renewed. If your awareness feels layered now, holding present sensation alongside fading memory that fits naturally, Ganymede holds time without sorting it. Callisto's surface remains largely as it has been for billions of years. Impacts have slowed. Internal change is minimal. What remains is a record that no longer needs updating. Craters overlap, edges soften, and everything rests where it is. If your mind feels content to remain where it is now, without seeking change, that belongs easily alongside Callisto's stillness. Rest does not require improvement. The smaller moons near Jupiter move in carefully spaced paths. They do not collide. They do not crowd one another. Each orbit has room, each path is respected. This spacing did not require planning. It emerged gradually, as unstable arrangements faded away. You don't need to imagine past chaos. The present calm stands on its own. Farther out, the irregular moons take longer, more tilted paths. Their motion feels less direct, but no less reliable. They complete their orbits over many years, returning slowly to familiar positions. If your thoughts are looping gently now, revisiting without urgency, that fits easily here. Slow returns do not need destinations. Jupiter's faint ring system remains almost unnoticed, composed of dust that is constantly replaced. Particles drift outward, disappear and are renewed. There is no moment when the ring is finished or unfinished. It exists as a process rather than a thing. You don't need to visualize the ring. Its faintness allows it to remain in the background. Occasionally, Jupiter's moons cast shadows on the planet's cloud tops. Small, dark circles move slowly across pale bands. These shadows are temporary. They leave no trace. You don't need to imagine the movement. The idea of passing darkness is enough, and even that is optional. Sometimes, a moon slips into Jupiter's shadow and experiences a brief night. Light fades gradually, then returns just as gently. There is no interruption to motion. The orbit continues without pause. If your awareness dims and brightens now, without pattern or effort, that mirrors these cycles, nothing needs correction. From Earth, the moon's movements are subtle, visible only with patience. Night after night, they shift slightly, returning to familiar arrangements. This motion once challenged old beliefs. Now, it is simply part of the sky's quiet behavior. You don't need to hold on to significance or history. Ordinariness is enough. Jupiter's gravity shapes the space around it into gentle curves. Moons follow these curves naturally, without resistance. There is no sense of being pulled tightly, only of being guided along a path that fits. You don't need to imagine guidance. Motion here is simply the absence of obstruction. The sun's light arrives at Jupiter softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces without glare. Shadows stretch gently. This subdued lighting gives the entire system a calm quality. Nothing is harsh. Nothing insists on attention. If your inner experience feels similarly softened now, that belongs here. Brightness is not required. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unchanged by these movements. They exist on a slower rhythm. You don't need to compare these timescales. Fast and slow coexist without conflict. Spacecraft that pass through the Jovian system do so briefly, gathering information and moving on. Their presence does not alter the moon's paths. The system does not respond, it simply continues. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly noticed, then gone, that is enough. Nothing here needs to be held. As awareness continues to drift, soften, or rest somewhere in between, nothing in the Jovian system changes. The moons do not wait, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, balanced and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As the sense of time loosens, Jupiter's moons feel less like objects and more like conditions. They are not events to witness. They are not stories unfolding. They are simply part of how space behaves when nothing interrupts it. Each moon follows a path that has been refined by repetition. The path does not improve, it does not deteriorate, it simply continues, fitting itself to gravity with no resistance. If your awareness feels less pointed now, less interested in labeling or tracking, that fits naturally here. Not everything needs to be identified to be present. Here's warmth is sustained not by fuel or flame, but by constant motion within. The moon is squeezed and released gently as it orbits, generating heat without drama. This heat moves slowly through rock, emerging only where it finds an easy route. Nothing bursts outward suddenly. Nothing demands attention. You don't need to imagine color or light or sound. You can let Io remain a quiet source of internal motion, active, yet contained. If that image dissolves, the motion continues. Europa's ice shell remains intact because it yields rather than resists. When stress builds, ice flows. When pressure eases, it rests again. This behavior does not lead toward a final state. It simply prevents extremes. If your thoughts are doing something similar now, loosening instead of breaking, that belongs here, Adjustment does not need direction. The ocean beneath Europa's ice remains untouched by surface changes, radiation, temperature swings, and impacts above do not reach it directly. It exists in a steady range, neither freezing nor boiling, held quietly by pressure and gravity. You don't need to imagine depth or darkness. The idea of shelter is enough, something allowed to continue without disturbance. Ganymede's presence feels settled in a different way. Its mass gives it a completeness that does not shift easily. Its orbit is wide and calm. Its rotation is locked and predictable. Its internal structure remains layered and stable. You don't need to think of this as permanence. Nothing here insists on lasting forever. It simply lasts now, and now is sufficient. Callisto's surface reflects a long history of little change. Its craters overlap gently, edges softened by time rather than erased by activity. The moon does not renew itself aggressively. It does not need to. If your awareness feels content to remain where it is now, without seeking stimulation, that fits easily alongside Callisto's stillness. Rest does not require transformation. The smaller moons nearer to Jupiter move through stronger gravitational gradients. Their paths are precise but forgiving. Tiny variations are absorbed without disruption. These moons do not require correction. They find balance naturally through repetition. You don't need to imagine forces or calculations. Balance here is not engineered. It emerges quietly. Farther out, the irregular moons take longer, wider paths. Their orbits tilt and stretch, shaped by capture long ago. They move slowly enough that change feels optional. Nothing about their motion is urgent. If your thoughts feel like they are wandering without purpose now, that fits naturally. Purpose is not required for continuation. Jupiter's faint rings remain almost invisible, composed of dust that drifts in and out of orbit. Particles arrive, disperse, and leave. The ring persists not because any particle stays, but because the process continues. You don't need to imagine the dust. The idea of persistence through exchange is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes, Jupiter's moons align in ways that briefly change how they appear from afar. One passes before another. A shadow crosses a surface. These alignments do not alter the moons themselves. They are changes in perspective, not in reality. If your perspective shifts now, if attention narrows or widens, nothing essential changes. Presence remains. The sun's light reaches Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently, without glare. Shadows stretch and soften, edges blur slightly. If your inner experience feels similarly muted now, that belongs here. Brightness is not required for awareness. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form and fade. Bands shift slowly. The moons pass overhead, unchanged by these movements. They exist on a slower rhythm. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that pass through the Jovian system do so briefly, gathering data and moving on. Their presence does not disturb the moon's paths. Observation does not alter motion. Attention does not create change. If thoughts pass through your awareness, now notice briefly. Then gone that fits easily here. Nothing needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity extends far into space, shaping trajectories gently rather than forcefully. Moons follow these curves without resistance. There is no sense of being pulled tightly, only of being guided along paths that fit. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply the absence of obstruction. As awareness continues to soften or drift or rest somewhere in between, nothing in the Jovian system responds. The moons do not pause. They do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, balanced and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As awareness settles further, the moons begin to feel less like distant objects and more like a steady presence that does not need to be named. They are there whether or not they are being described. They do not sharpen when noticed. They do not fade when ignored. This constancy is not dramatic. It is quiet in the way gravity itself is quiet, always present, never announcing. If your attention drifts in and out now, that fits easily alongside this kind of constancy. Nothing here requires continuous awareness. Io's motion around Jupiter continues without emphasis. Its orbit remains slightly stretched, bringing it closer and farther in a gentle cycle. This variation repeats endlessly. The interior responds each time, flexing and warming, then easing again. There is no escalation, no build-up toward anything new. You don't need to imagine internal motion clearly. It can remain a vague sense of warmth moving slowly through solid ground. If that sense dissolves, the process continues unchanged. Europa's surface maintains its brightness, reflecting sunlight softly. From a distance, it appears smooth and uniform. Closer inspection reveals lines and fractures, but even those do not feel sharp. They curve and reconnect, recording motion that is already finished. The ice has moved, then rested. If your thoughts feel like they are drifting without sharp edges now, that belongs naturally. Europa does not insist on clarity. The ocean beneath the ice remains insulated from the surface. Pressure keeps it liquid, distance keeps it dark. It does not respond to the rhythm of day and night above it. It remains steady, held quietly in place. You don't need to imagine waves or currents. The idea of persistence without visibility is enough, and even that can fade. Ganymede's presence continues to feel grounded, even suspended in space. Its mass gives it a kind of steadiness that does not fluctuate. Its orbit repeats, its rotation remains locked, its internal structure stays layered and arranged. You don't need to think of this as strength or stability. Those are just labels. Ganymede continues regardless of description. Callisto's surface absorbs light and releases it slowly. Temperature changes are small and gradual. Nothing on Callisto reacts quickly, nothing sharpens or collapses. If your own sensations feel muted now, less intense, that fits easily here. Not everything needs to be vivid. The smaller moons near Jupiter move through regions shaped strongly by gravity and radiation. Their surfaces change at the smallest scales, molecule by molecule. These changes accumulate without drawing attention. They're too slow to notice directly. You don't need to follow these details. Subtlety does not require supervision. Farther out, the irregular moons trace wide, tilted paths. Their orbits feel relaxed rather than precise. They were captured long ago, finding places where motion could continue without conflict. That capture does not weigh on them now. If your thoughts feel untethered or loosely connected now, that belongs naturally. Not everything needs a tight path. Jupiter's faint rings remain almost invisible, existing more as suggestion than structure. Dust drifts outward, thins, and disappears. New dust replaces it. There is no moment when the rings begin or end. They exist as an ongoing exchange. You don't need to imagine the particles. The idea of continuity through change is enough, and even that is optional. Sometimes Jupiter's moons align in ways that briefly change how they appear from a distance. One passes in front of another. A shadow moves across a surface. These alignments are temporary. They leave no trace. If parts of this narration slip past without being heard, that mirrors these moments. Nothing essential changes. The sun's light reaches Jupiter softened by distance. It illuminates without glare. Shadows stretch gently. This moderated light gives the entire system a calm tone. Nothing is harsh. Nothing demands attention. If your inner experience feels similarly softened now, that fits easily here. Brightness is not required for presence. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected by these changes. They exist on a slower rhythm. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that pass through the Jovian system do so briefly, borrowing speed and moving on. They observe and depart. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their paths. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly noticed, then gone, that is enough. Nothing needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity extends far into space, shaping trajectories gently rather than forcefully. Moons follow these curves without resistance. There is no sense of being pulled tightly, only of being guided along paths that fit. You don't need to imagine guidance. Motion here is simply the absence of obstruction, as awareness continues to soften or drift, or rest somewhere in between. Nothing in the Jovian system responds. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, balanced and complete whether you are listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As the mind loosens its grip on sequence, Jupiter's moons can feel less like separate bodies and more like a single, slow arrangement, not blended together, but held in the same quiet field, each one moving, each one distinct, yet none competing for attention. They do not need to be compared, they do not need to be ranked, they simply share space, each following its own curve with no awareness of the others being noticed or ignored. If your awareness feels spread out now, not centered on any one thought, that fits naturally here. Wide attention does not require focus. Io continues its close orbit, tracing the same slightly stretched path again and again. Each time it moves nearer to Jupiter, internal stress increases. Each time it moves farther away, that stress eases. This cycle does not build, it does not resolve. It simply repeats, quietly generating warmth that travels slowly outward. You don't need to imagine pressure or release. You can let the idea remain as a gentle pulse, something tightening and loosening without urgency. If that pulse fades from awareness, the cycle continues. Europa's surface holds its patterns lightly. The long dark lines that cross its ice are records of movement, not signs of damage. They curve gently, avoiding sharp intersections. The ice behaves like something patient. When stress appears, it yields. When stress passes, it rests. If your thoughts feel patient now, not pushing, not resisting, that belongs naturally here. Europa does not insist on speed. Beneath the ice, the ocean remains sealed away, held at depth by pressure and temperature. It does not know day or night. It does not respond to surface weather. It persists quietly, moving slowly if it moves at all. You don't need to imagine water or depth. The idea of something continuing without awareness is enough, and even that may soften and fade. Ganymede's presence remains broad and steady. Its mass gives it a quiet authority that does not fluctuate. Nothing nudges it easily. Its orbit repeats with precision. Its rotation remains locked, its internal layers stay arranged and supported. You don't need to think of this as stability. That word adds weight. Ganymede simply is as it is, and that is sufficient. Callisto continues farther out, its motion unhurried and even. It experiences little internal change. Its surface holds the marks of time without needing to update them. Craters overlap and soften. Edges blur. Details fade gently. If your awareness feels similarly softened now, less sharp, that fits easily here. Nothing here needs definition. The smaller moons closer to Jupiter move along paths shaped strongly by gravity. Their orbits are precise, but forgiving. Small variations are absorbed naturally. These moons do not require adjustment. Balance emerges through repetition alone. You don't need to imagine forces acting or correcting. The system does not feel effort. Farther out, the irregular moons follow long, tilted paths. Their motion feels relaxed rather than exact. They take years, sometimes decades, to complete a single orbit. From moment to moment, they barely seem to move at all. If your thoughts are lingering now, drifting without direction, that belongs naturally. Slowness does not need purpose. Jupiter's faint rings remain almost unnoticed, dust suspended in orbit, reflecting just enough light to be detected. Particles leave, particles arrive. The ring exists not as a fixed object, but as a continuous exchange. You don't need to picture dust or motion. The idea of something persisting through constant change is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes, Jupiter's moons pass in front of one another from a distant viewpoint. For a while, one obscures another. Then they separate again. Nothing changes for the moons themselves, only the view shifts. If parts of this narration slip by without being heard, that mirrors this motion. Presence does not depend on visibility. The sun's light reaches Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently, without glare. Shadows stretch slowly, transitions are gradual. If your inner experience feels dimmer or quieter now, that belongs here. Light does not need to be bright to exist. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, forming bands and storms that shift more quickly than the orbits above them. Weather changes, the moons do not. They pass overhead, unaffected, existing on a slower scale of time. You don't need to compare these rhythms. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that visit Jupiter pass through briefly, gathering moments of information before moving on. Their presence does not alter the system. The moons do not respond, they do not notice. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone that fits naturally. Nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity shapes space gently, curving paths without forcing them. Moons follow these curves effortlessly. There is no sense of being pulled tight, only of moving where motion is easiest. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing resists. As awareness continues to soften, drift, or rest somewhere in between, nothing in the Jovian system reacts. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As the sense of effort continues to fade, Jupiter's moons can begin to feel almost self-supporting. They do not need explanation to stay in place. They do not rely on description to continue moving. They are held by relationships that exist whether they are named or not. Gravity does not check for attention. It does not wait for understanding. It simply curves space, and the moons follow those curves because there is nowhere else to go that feels easier. If your awareness feels like it's letting go of explanations now, that fits easily here. Nothing in this system requires comprehension in order to remain steady. Io remains close to Jupiter, completing its orbit in less than 2 Earth days. This quick pace does not feel rushed. It is simply the rhythm that fits its distance. The moon warms from the inside as it moves, flexing slightly each time it passes closer, relaxing again as it moves farther away. This warming is not dramatic. It does not surge. It continues quietly, cycle after cycle. You don't need to imagine speed or pressure. You can let Io be a small presence, moving steadily, carrying warmth without urgency. If this presence fades from awareness, the warmth remains. Europa follows behind, its orbit wider, its motion slower. Each circuit takes a little more time. Nothing about it feels hurried. The ice on its surface reflects light softly, smoothing out contrasts. The fractures across that ice mark movement that has already happened, not movement that needs attention now. If your thoughts feel like they've already passed through something and are now settling, that fits naturally here. Europa does not insist on immediacy. Beneath the ice, the ocean stays sealed and quiet. It does not rise or fall with surface light. It does not react to passing shadows. It exists in a narrow balance that allows it to continue unchanged. You don't need to imagine motion there at all. The idea of something continuing without being perceived is enough, and even that can soften and dissolve. Ganymede moves farther out still, taking more than a week to complete a single orbit. This slower pace gives it a sense of breadth rather than delay. Its size allows it to hold onto a faint atmosphere, barely more than a trace. This atmosphere does not behave like air. It does not circulate or press. It simply exists as a boundary, thin and calm. You don't need to imagine sky or breathing. Boundaries here do not require sensation. Callisto travels farther out, completing its orbit in over 2 Earth weeks. At this distance, Jupiter's pull is gentler. The Moon experiences little internal strain. Its surface reflects this quiet history, ancient, cratered, unchanged by internal forces. Edges soften over time, details blur. If your awareness feels similarly blurred now, not sharply defined, that belongs easily here. Nothing here needs sharpness. Beyond the large moons, Jupiter's smaller companions follow their own paths. Some move close in, others far out. Some travel in neat planes, others at steep angles. Their shapes are irregular. Their gravity is weak, and yet they remain bound, continuing along paths that have proven stable. You don't need to remember any of their names. Most of them are rarely spoken. They do not require recognition. If thoughts drift in your mind without names now, that fits naturally. Naming is not required for presence. Jupiter's rings remain faint and understated, made of dust that is constantly in motion. Particles drift outward, thin, and disappear. New particles take their place. The ring persists not because anything stays, but because the exchange continues. You don't need to imagine particles or paths. The idea of continuity without permanence is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes our multiple moons align in ways that briefly change how they appear from afar. One may pass in front of another. A shadow may cross a surface. These moments are predictable and temporary. They leave no lasting mark. If parts of this narration pass unnoticed, that mirrors these alignments, nothing essential is altered by being missed. The sun's light reaches Jupiter after a long journey, dimmer than it is near Earth. It illuminates surfaces without glare, shadows stretch and soften. This muted light gives the entire system a calm quality. Nothing sparkles sharply, nothing demands to be seen. If your inner experience feels similarly dimmed or softened now, that belongs here. Brightness is not required. Jupiter's clouds flow beneath the moons, forming bands and storms that change on shorter timescales. Weather shifts, patterns stretch and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected. They exist on a slower rhythm, one that does not intersect with weather. You don't need to compare these rhythms. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Occasionally a moon enters Jupiter's shadow, experiencing a brief night. Light fades gradually. Temperature shifts slightly. Then light returns, just as gently. The orbit continues uninterrupted. If your awareness dims and brightens now, without effort or pattern, that mirrors these cycles. Nothing here requires steadiness. Spacecraft that pass through the Jovian system do so quickly. Borrowing speed from gravity and moving on, they observe, measure, and depart. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their paths. They do not acknowledge the passing presence. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone that fits easily here, nothing needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity extends far into space, shaping trajectories gently rather than forcefully. Moons follow these curves without resistance. There is no sense of being pulled tightly, only of moving where motion feels natural. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing pushes back. As awareness continues to soften, or drift, or rest somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, nothing in the Jovian system responds. The moons do not wait, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As attention becomes less concerned with sequence, Jupiter's moons feel increasingly like part of a larger stillness. They move, but the movement no longer stands out. It blends into the background, steady enough to feel almost like rest. This kind of motion doesn't interrupt quiet, it supports it. The moons continue without marking time, without dividing moments into before and after. If your awareness feels less anchored now floating rather than following that fits naturally here, not everything needs a timeline. Io completes another orbit, then another, its path unchanged. The internal flexing that warms it does not grow stronger or weaker. It remains within a narrow, familiar range. Heat rises, spreads, and dissipates slowly. Surfaces adjust. Nothing accumulates tension. You don't need to imagine cycles or repetition clearly. They do not require tracking. If this idea slips away, the cycle continues without noticing. Europa's surface remains luminous against the dark of space. Its brightness is even and calm, not sharp. The fractures across its ice appear like gentle markings rather than breaks. These lines record motion that has already ended. They do not signal change that needs attention now. If your thoughts feel like they are leaving faint traces and then moving on, that fits easily here. Europa does not insist on holding on. Beneath the ice, the ocean remains insulated and distant. It does not respond to surface light or shadow. It exists in its own steady range of pressure and temperature. There is no urgency in its persistence. It continues simply because conditions allow it to. You don't need to imagine depth or scale. The idea of quiet continuation is enough, and even that can soften and fade. Ganymede's mass gives it a sense of presence that does not fluctuate. It does not feel provisional. It does not feel in transition. Its orbit repeats with the same duration each time. Its rotation remains locked. Its internal layers stay arranged and supported. You don't need to label this as stability. Labels add weight. Ganymede continues regardless of how it is described. Callisto's surface remains subdued, absorbing light and releasing it slowly. Temperature changes are small and gradual. Nothing sharpens or collapses, nothing accelerates. If your own sensations feel similarly muted now, less intense, that fits naturally. Not everything needs to be vivid to be present. The smaller moons near Jupiter continue along their precise paths. Their orbits do not intersect. They keep respectful distances. These arrangements did not require planning. They emerged slowly as unstable paths faded away. You don't need to imagine past disorder. The present calm stands on its own. Farther out, the irregular moons trace wide, tilted arcs. Their motion is slower, more drawn out. From moment to moment, they barely seem to move at all. Time stretches along their paths. If your thoughts feel elongated, now lingering without urgency that belongs naturally here, slow movement does not need direction. Jupiter's faint rings remain barely visible, dust suspended in orbit. Particles drift outward, thin, and disappear. Others replace them. The ring persists not because anything stays, but because the exchange continues. You don't need to picture dust or motion. The idea of continuity without permanence is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes Jupiter's moons pass behind the planet and vanish from view. For a while, they are hidden completely. Then they emerge again, unchanged. Nothing about their absence altered their paths. Nothing needed to restart. If parts of this narration slip out of awareness that mirrors this motion, presence does not require visibility. The sun's light arrives at Jupiter softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently. Shadows stretch without sharp edges. This subdued lighting gives the entire system a calm tone. Nothing demands attention. If your inner experience feels similarly dimmed now, that fits easily here. Light does not need intensity to exist. Jupiter's clouds flow beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected. They exist on a slower rhythm. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that pass through the Jovian system do so briefly, gathering moments of information before moving on. Their presence does not alter the moon's motion. The system does not respond, it simply continues. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone, that is enough. Nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity shapes space gently, curving paths without force. Moons follow these curves effortlessly. There is no sense of being pulled tightly, only of moving where motion is easiest. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing resists. As awareness continues to soften, drift, or rest somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, nothing in the Jovian system reacts. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you are listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As the sense of effort continues to loosen, the moons of Jupiter feel less like destinations for thought and more like a steady environment. They are not asking to be pictured clearly. They are not asking to be remembered later. They simply remain, moving in ways that do not depend on being followed. Their motion does not announce itself. It does not interrupt quiet. It blends into it, like something that has always been there and expects nothing in return. If your awareness feels wider now, less interested in holding on to any one idea, that fits easily here. Nothing in this system requires focus to remain whole. Io continues its close, quick orbit, repeating the same gentle variations in distance again and again. The moon flexes slightly as it moves, warming inside without strain. Heat rises slowly, spreads, and then settles into the surrounding rock. There is no moment when this process peaks, no moment when it resolves. It simply continues, cycle after cycle, never demanding attention. You don't need to imagine motion or warmth clearly. You can let Io be a small presence, active yet contained, existing comfortably at the edge of awareness. If it fades from mind entirely, the process continues unchanged. Europa moves a little farther out, its orbit slower and more spacious. Its ice-covered surface reflects sunlight softly, smoothing edges and contrasts. From a distance, it appears calm and nearly uniform. The long lines across its surface are records of movement that has already finished. Ice shifted, stress released, then everything rested again. If your thoughts feel like they are easing rather than pushing forward now, that belongs naturally here. Europa does not insist on momentum. Beneath the ice, the ocean remains sealed and distant. It does not respond to passing shadows or changing light above. Pressure and temperature keep it steady, holding it in a quiet range where nothing dramatic needs to happen. You don't need to imagine water or depth. The idea of something continuing without awareness is enough, and even that can soften and drift away. Ganymede's presence continues to feel broad and settled. Its mass gives it a quiet certainty that does not fluctuate. Its orbit repeats. Its rotation remains locked. Its internal layers stay arranged and supported. Nothing about Ganymede feels provisional. Nothing suggests hurry. You don't need to think of this as permanence. That word carries too much weight. Ganymede simply exists as it is, and that is sufficient. Callisto travels farther out still, its motion wide and unhurried. It experiences little internal change. Its surface holds the marks of time openly, without trying to erase them. Craters overlap and soften, edges blur, details fade gently into one another. If your awareness feels similarly softened now, less sharp and less insistent, that fits easily here. Nothing here needs definition. The smaller moons closer to Jupiter continue along carefully spaced paths. Their orbits do not intersect. They keep room between one another without effort. These arrangements were not designed. They emerged slowly as unstable paths faded away over time. You don't need to imagine past disorder. The present calm stands on its own. Farther out, the irregular moons trace long, tilted arcs through space. Their motion feels relaxed rather than exact. From moment to moment, they barely seem to move at all. Time stretches along their paths. Years pass quietly as they complete a single circuit. If your thoughts are lingering now, drifting without urgency, that belongs naturally. Slow movement does not need purpose. Jupiter's faint rings remain almost unnoticed. Dust suspended in orbit and reflecting just enough light to be detected. Particles drift outward, thin, and disappear. Others take their place. The ring exists not as a fixed object, but as a continuous exchange. Nothing stays, nothing ends. You don't need to picture the dust. The idea of continuity without permanence is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes one of Jupiter's moons slips behind the planet and disappears from view. For a while, it cannot be seen at all. Then it emerges again, unchanged, continuing exactly as before. Nothing about its absence altered its motion. Nothing needed to resume. If parts of this narration slip out of awareness that mirrors this motion, presence does not require visibility. The sun's light arrives at Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently, without glare. Shadows stretch slowly, without sharp edges. This muted light gives the entire system a calm tone. Nothing sparkles insistently. Nothing demands to be seen. If your inner experience feels similarly dimmed or quiet now, that fits easily here. Light does not need intensity to exist. Jupiter's clouds flow beneath the moons, forming bands and storms that change more quickly than the orbits above them. Weather shifts, patterns stretch and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected by these changes. They exist on a slower rhythm, one that does not intersect with weather at all. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that visit Jupiter pass through briefly, borrowing speed from gravity and moving on. They observe, measure, and depart. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their paths. They do not acknowledge the passing presence. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone that fits naturally. Nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity shapes space gently, curving paths without force. Moons follow these curves effortlessly, moving where motion feels easiest. There is no sense of being pulled tight, only of continuing along paths that fit naturally. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing resists. As awareness continues to soften, drift, or rest somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, nothing in the Jovian system reacts. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As attention grows softer, the idea of watching Jupiter's moons can loosen into something closer to simply being near them, not observing, not following, just sharing space with motions that do not require company. They have been moving this way for so long that motion itself feels settled. Nothing is in transition. Nothing is waiting to arrive somewhere else. If your awareness feels like it is resting beside something rather than focusing on it, That belongs naturally here. The moons do not need to be centered in thought to remain steady. Io completes another quiet circuit. Its closeness to Jupiter gives it a rhythm that is quick but unstrained. Each pass brings a familiar flexing, a familiar release. The heat that results does not rush outward. It travels slowly through rock, emerging gently where it can. Nothing pushes, nothing resists. You don't need to imagine the interior at all. Io can remain simply as movement and warmth, contained and repetitive. If that idea fades, the orbit continues without noticing. Europa follows its own wider path, moving with more space between moments. Its surface reflects sunlight softly, without glare, from far away. It looks calm and nearly featureless. The lines etched across its ice are records of adjustment, not signs of damage. Ice shifted, then rested. Stress passed, then released. If your thoughts feel like they are settling after small shifts, that fits easily here. Europa does not rush to change. The ocean beneath the ice remains sealed away from the surface. Pressure and temperature hold it in a quiet balance. It does not respond to light or shadow above. It exists without reference to what is happening outside it. You don't need to imagine water or darkness. The idea of something continuing quietly, without awareness, is enough, and even that can soften and disappear. Ganymede's presence remains broad and steady. Its mass gives it a sense of being anchored, even while moving. Nothing about it feels provisional or in flux. Its orbit repeats with the same gentle certainty each time. Its rotation remains locked. Its internal layers stay arranged and supported. You don't need to call this stability. Words are unnecessary here, Ganymede continues, and that is enough. Callisto travels farther out, where Jupiter's influence is gentler. Its motion feels wide and unhurried. It experiences little internal change. The surface reflects this calm history. Craters overlap softly. Edges blur with age rather than being erased. If your awareness feels similarly softened now, less concerned with sharp detail, that belongs here. Nothing in this space requires definition. Closer in, smaller moons continue along their carefully spaced paths. Their orbits do not cross. They maintain distance without effort. These arrangements were not planned. They emerged slowly as unstable paths faded away over time. You don't need to imagine past disorder. The present calm stands on its own, complete without explanation. Farther out, irregular moons trace long, tilted arcs through space. Their paths are stretched and angled, shaped by capture long ago. They move so slowly that change feels optional. From one moment to the next, almost nothing seems to happen. If your thoughts are lingering now, drifting without urgency, that fits naturally. Slowness does not need direction. Jupiter's faint rings remain barely visible, composed of dust that drifts and disperses. Particles leave, particles arrive. The ring exists not as a fixed object, but as a process that continues quietly. You don't need to imagine dust or motion. The idea of continuity through exchange is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes, a moon passes behind Jupiter and disappears from view. For a while, it is hidden completely. Then it reappears, unchanged, continuing as before. Nothing about its absence altered its path. Nothing needed to resume. If parts of this narration slip out of awareness that mirrors this motion, presence does not depend on being seen. The sun's light reaches Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently, without intensity. Shadows stretch slowly. This muted light gives the entire system a calm tone. Nothing insists on attention. If your inner experience feels similarly dimmed or quiet now, that belongs here. Light does not need brightness to exist. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected, existing on a slower rhythm entirely. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that visit Jupiter pass through briefly, borrowing speed from gravity and moving on. They observe, record, and depart. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their motion. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone that fits easily here. Nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity shapes space gently, curving paths without force. Moons follow these curves effortlessly, moving where motion feels natural. There is no sense of being pulled tight, only of continuing along paths that fit. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing resists. As awareness continues to soften, drift, or rest somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, nothing in the Jovian system responds. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As the need to follow details fades, Jupiter's moons can feel less like subjects of thought and more like a quiet landscape that simply exists. They do not move toward anything. They do not move away. They remain within a system that has already found its balance. This balance does not need maintenance. It does not need correction. It continues because it has nothing pressing against it. If your awareness feels like it is settling into a similar ease now, that belongs naturally here. Ease does not require intention. Io completes its orbit again, tracing the same familiar curve. Its closeness to Jupiter brings a gentle rhythm of tightening and easing. Internal warmth is generated, not as a spike, but as a steady presence. The surface responds quietly, accepting new material, smoothing transitions over time. Nothing announces itself as new or old. You don't need to imagine change as something noticeable. Io's activity can remain background motion, present without emphasis. If that sense dissolves, the motion continues unchanged. Europa moves along its wider path, slower and more spacious. Its surface continues to reflect sunlight softly, without sharp contrasts. From far away, it appears calm and nearly uniform. The lines across its ice are not reminders of urgency. They are records of adjustment that has already passed. If your thoughts feel like they are settling after small shifts, that fits easily here. Europa does not insist on forward motion. Beneath the ice, the ocean remains sealed and distant. Pressure holds it liquid. Darkness holds it unchanged. It does not respond to events above it. It simply continues within its narrow, stable range. You don't need to imagine depth or movement. The idea of persistence without awareness is enough, and even that can soften and fade. Ganymede's presence continues to feel broad and settled. Its mass gives it a sense of being anchored, even while it moves. Nothing about it suggests transition. Its orbit repeats with the same duration each time. Its rotation remains locked. Its internal layers stay arranged and supported. You don't need to call this stability. Words add weight. Ganymede continues, and that is sufficient. Callisto travels farther out, its path wide and unhurried. Jupiter's influence is gentler here. The moon experiences little internal change. Its surface reflects this long, quiet history. Craters overlap softly. Edges blur gradually. If your awareness feels similarly softened now, less concerned with sharp edges, that belongs here. Nothing in this space requires definition. Closer and smaller moons continue along carefully spaced paths. Their orbits do not cross. They maintain distance without effort. These arrangements emerge slowly, as unstable paths faded away over time. No planning was required. You don't need to imagine past disorder. The present calm stands on its own, complete. Farther out, irregular moons trace long, tilted arcs. Their motion feels relaxed rather than exact. From moment to moment, they barely seem to move at all. Years pass quietly as they complete a single circuit. If your thoughts are lingering now, drifting without urgency, that fits naturally. Slowness does not need purpose. Jupiter's faint rings remain almost unnoticed. Dust suspended in orbit. Particles drift outward, thin, and disappear. Others replace them. The ring exists not as a fixed object, but as an ongoing exchange. Nothing stays, nothing ends. You don't need to picture the dust. The idea of continuity without permanence is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes a moon passes behind Jupiter and disappears from view. For a while it is hidden completely. Then it reappears, unchanged. Nothing about its absence altered its path. Nothing needed to resume. If parts of this narration slip out of awareness that mirrors this motion, presence does not depend on being seen. The sun's light arrives at Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently. Shadows stretch without sharp edges. This muted light gives the entire system a calm tone. Nothing insists on attention. If your inner experience feels similarly dimmed or quiet now, that belongs here. Light does not need brightness to exist. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected, existing on a slower rhythm. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that visit Jupiter pass through briefly, borrowing speed from gravity and moving on. They observe, record, and depart. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their motion. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone that fits easily here, nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity shapes space gently, curving paths without force. Moons follow these curves effortlessly, moving where motion feels natural. There is no sense of being pulled tight, only of continuing along paths that fit. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing resists. As awareness continues to soften, drift, or rest somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, nothing in the Jovian system reacts. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As the sense of listening loosens further, Jupiter's moons can feel less like something being described and more like something quietly nearby. Not close, not distant, just present in the same broad calm. They do not shift when named. They do not settle when forgotten. Their motion has no urgency attached to it. It doesn't need to be tracked or completed. It simply unfolds, steady enough to feel like part of the silence itself. If your awareness feels wide now, lightly holding everything and nothing at once, that fits naturally here. The moons do not require a center of attention. Io continues its close path around Jupiter, repeating the same gentle variations in distance. Each approach brings a familiar flexing. Each retreat allows that tension to ease. The warmth generated inside does not surge outward. It travels slowly through solid ground, emerging where conditions allow. Nothing bursts, nothing demands release. You don't need to imagine heat or motion clearly. Io can remain a small, steady presence at the edge of awareness. If it fades entirely, the orbit continues without interruption. Europa moves along its wider track, unhurried and consistent. Its surface reflects sunlight softly, smoothing contrast and detail. From far away, it appears calm and nearly unchanged. The long lines across its ice do not signal damage or urgency. They are traces of movement that has already ended. Ice shifted, stress passed, then everything rested again. If your thoughts feel like they're settling after small internal shifts, that belongs naturally here. Europa does not insist on progress. Beneath the ice, the ocean remains sealed and distant. Pressure holds it liquid. Darkness keeps it insulated from surface change. It does not respond to shadows or brightness above. It continues quietly within a narrow range that allows it to persist. You don't need to imagine water, depth, or motion. The idea of something continuing without awareness is enough, and even that can drift away. Ganymede's presence remains broad and settled. Its mass gives it a sense of completeness that does not fluctuate. Nothing nudges it easily. Its orbit repeats with the same duration each time. Its rotation remains locked. Its internal layers stay arranged and supported. You don't need to describe this as stability or strength. Words are unnecessary here. Ganymede continues, and that is sufficient. Callisto travels farther out, where Jupiter's influence is gentler. Its motion is wide and even. Internal change is minimal. The surface reflects this long, quiet history. Craters overlap softly. Edges blur with age rather than being erased. If your awareness feels similarly softened now, less sharp and less insistent, that fits easily here. Nothing in this space requires precision. Closer to Jupiter, smaller moons continue along carefully spaced paths. Their orbits do not intersect. They maintain distance without effort or correction. These arrangements were not designed. They emerged gradually as unstable paths faded away. You don't need to imagine past disorder. The present calm stands on its own, complete without explanation. Farther out, irregular moons trace long, tilted arcs through space. Their motion feels relaxed rather than exact. From moment to moment, they barely seem to move at all. Years pass quietly as they complete a single circuit. If your thoughts are lingering now, drifting without urgency, that belongs naturally. Slowness does not need direction. Jupiter's faint rings remain almost unnoticed. Dust suspended in orbit. Particles drift outward, thin, and disappear. Others arrive to take their place. The ring exists not as a fixed object, but as an ongoing exchange. Nothing stays, nothing finishes. You don't need to picture the dust. The idea of continuity without permanence is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes, one of Jupiter's moons slips behind the planet and disappears from view. For a while, it cannot be seen at all. Then it reappears, unchanged, continuing exactly as before. Nothing about its absence altered its motion. Nothing needed to restart. If parts of this narration slip out of awareness that mirrors this motion, presence does not depend on visibility. The sun's light reaches Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently, without glare. Shadows stretch slowly, without sharp edges. This muted light gives the entire system a calm tone. Nothing insists on being noticed. If your inner experience feels similarly dimmed or quiet now, that belongs here. Light does not need intensity to exist. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected, existing on a slower rhythm entirely. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that visit Jupiter pass through briefly, borrowing speed from gravity and moving on. They observe, measure, and depart. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their paths. They do not acknowledge the passing presence. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone that fits easily here, nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity shapes space gently, curving paths without force. Moons follow these curves effortlessly, moving where motion feels easiest. There is no sense of being pulled tight, only of continuing along paths that fit. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing resists. As awareness continues to soften, drift, or rest somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, nothing in the Jovian system reacts. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As the sense of needing to follow along continues to fade, the moons of Jupiter can feel more like a quiet condition than a collection of objects. They are there in the way night air is there, present without asking to be noticed, steady without needing description. Nothing about them presses forward, nothing recedes. They move because motion is simply how they exist, not as effort, not as intention, just as continuation. If your awareness feels like it's resting inside something broad and calm now, that fits naturally here. The moons do not require your attention to remain complete. Io continues its close orbit, repeating the same gentle variations again and again. Each pass near Jupiter brings a familiar flexing. Each retreat allows that flexing to ease. The warmth created inside does not surge or escape suddenly. It moves slowly, patiently, through rock that responds over long spans of time. Nothing rushes outward, nothing needs release. You don't need to imagine heat as sensation. Io can remain a quiet source of internal motion, active without intensity. If this idea fades entirely, the orbit continues without interruption. Europa moves along its wider path, unhurried and consistent. Its ice-covered surface reflects sunlight softly, smoothing contrast and detail. From a distance, it looks calm, almost simple. The lines etched across the ice are traces of movement that has already passed. Ice shifted, stress eased, then everything rested again. If your thoughts feel like they're settling after small internal adjustments, that belongs naturally here. Europa does not insist on progress or resolution. Beneath the ice, the ocean remains sealed away from the surface world. Pressure holds it liquid, darkness holds it steady. It does not respond to light or shadow above. It exists quietly within a narrow range that allows it to continue. You don't need to imagine depth or motion. The idea of something persisting without awareness is enough, and even that can drift away. Ganymede's presence continues to feel broad and settled. Its mass gives it a sense of being anchored, even while it moves. Nothing about it feels provisional. Its orbit repeats with the same duration each time. Its rotation remains locked. Its internal layers stay arranged and supported. You don't need to label this as strength or stability. Those words are heavier than necessary. Ganymede simply continues as it is. Callisto travels farther out, where Jupiter's influence is gentler. Its motion is wide and even. Internal change is minimal. The surface reflects this long, quiet history. Craters overlap softly. Edges blur with age rather than being erased. If your awareness feels similarly softened now, less defined and less insistent, that fits easily here. Nothing in this space requires sharp focus. Closer to Jupiter, smaller moons continue along carefully spaced paths. Their orbits do not intersect. They maintain distance without effort. These arrangements were not planned. They emerged slowly as unstable paths faded away over time. You don't need to imagine earlier disorder. The present calm stands on its own, complete without explanation. Farther out, irregular moons trace long, tilted arcs through space. Their motion feels relaxed rather than precise. From moment to moment, they barely seem to move at all. Years pass quietly as they complete a single circuit. If your thoughts are lingering now, drifting without urgency, that belongs naturally. Slowness does not need direction. Jupiter's faint rings remain almost unnoticed. Dust suspended in orbit, particles drift outward, thin, and disappear. Others arrive to take their place. The ring exists not as a fixed object, but as an ongoing exchange. Nothing stays, nothing finishes. You don't need to picture the dust. The idea of continuity without permanence is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes one of Jupiter's moons slips behind the planet and disappears from view. For a while, it cannot be seen at all. Then it reappears, unchanged, continuing exactly as before. Nothing about its absence altered its motion. Nothing needed to restart. If parts of this narration slip out of awareness that mirrors this motion, presence does not depend on visibility. The sun's light reaches Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently, without glare. Shadows stretch slowly, without sharp edges. This muted light gives the entire system a calm tone. Nothing insists on being noticed. If your inner experience feels similarly dimmed or quiet now, that belongs here. Light does not need intensity to exist. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected, existing on a slower rhythm entirely. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that visit Jupiter pass through briefly, borrowing speed from gravity and moving on. They observe, measure, and depart. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their paths. They do not acknowledge the passing presence. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone that fits easily here. Nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity shapes space gently, curving paths without force. Moons follow these curves effortlessly, moving where motion feels easiest. There is no sense of being pulled tight, only of continuing along paths that fit. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing resists. As awareness continues to soften, drift, or rest somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, nothing in the Jovian system reacts. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you are listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As the sense of separation between listener and subject grows thinner, Jupiter's moons can feel less like distant bodies and more like a quiet backdrop to whatever state you're in now. They don't intrude, they don't withdraw, they simply remain, steady enough to fade into the edges of awareness without disappearing. Their motion does not compete with rest, it supports it, the way a slow tide supports floating without carrying anything away. Nothing needs to be followed, nothing needs to be finished. If your awareness feels lightly present now, not fully engaged and not fully gone, that fits naturally here. The moons do not ask you to choose a state. Io continues its close, repeating path around Jupiter. Its orbit remains slightly stretched, bringing it closer, then farther, in a rhythm that never surprises. Each cycle brings the same gentle internal flexing. Each cycle allows that flexing to ease again. The heat produced inside does not burst outward. It moves slowly through rock, emerging where conditions allow. The surface accepts these changes quietly, smoothing over transitions without comment. You don't need to imagine heat or motion clearly. Io can remain a simple presence, active, contained, and unconcerned with attention. If this presence slips away from thought, the orbit continues exactly as before. Europa moves along its wider track, with more space between moments. Its ice-covered surface reflects sunlight softly, without glare or sharp contrast. From far away, it appears calm and nearly unchanging. The long, dark lines crossing the ice are not warnings or disruptions. They are records of movement that has already settled. Ice shifted, stress eased, then everything rested again. If your thoughts feel like they're settling after small adjustments, that belongs naturally here. Europa does not insist on urgency or resolution. Beneath the ice, the ocean remains sealed and distant. Pressure keeps it liquid. Darkness keeps it insulated. It does not respond to surface light or shadow. It exists quietly within a narrow balance that allows it to persist. No attention is required. You don't need to imagine depth or movement. The idea of something continuing without awareness is enough, and even that can soften and fade. Ganymede's presence continues to feel broad and settled. Its mass gives it a quiet sense of completeness. Nothing about it feels temporary or in flux. Its orbit repeats with the same duration, its rotation remains locked, its internal layers stay arranged and supported. You don't need to describe this as stability. Words add effort where none is needed. Ganymede continues, and that is sufficient. Callisto travels farther out, where Jupiter's influence is gentler and more diffuse. Its motion is wide and unhurried. Internal change is minimal. The surface reflects this long, quiet history. Craters overlap softly. Edges blur with age rather than being erased. If your awareness feels similarly softened now, less sharp and less insistent, that fits easily here. Nothing in this space requires definition. Closer to Jupiter, smaller moons continue along carefully spaced paths. Their orbits do not intersect. They maintain distance without effort or correction. These arrangements were not planned. They emerged slowly as unstable paths faded away over long spans of time. You don't need to imagine earlier disorder. The present calm stands on its own, complete without explanation. Farther out, irregular moons trace long, tilted arcs through space. Their motion feels relaxed rather than precise. From moment to moment, they barely seem to move at all. Years pass quietly as they complete a single circuit. Time stretches along their paths without pressure. If your thoughts are lingering now, drifting without urgency, that belongs naturally. Slowness does not need purpose. Jupiter's faint rings remain almost unnoticed. Dust suspended in orbit. Particles drift outward, thin, and disappear. Others arrive to take their place. The ring exists not as a fixed object, but as an ongoing exchange. Nothing stays, nothing finishes. You don't need to picture the dust. The idea of continuity without permanence is enough, and even that can fade. Sometimes one of Jupiter's moons slips behind the planet and disappears from view. For a while, it cannot be seen at all. Then it reappears, unchanged, continuing exactly as before. Nothing about its absence altered its motion. Nothing needed to restart. If parts of this narration slip out of awareness that mirrors this motion, presence does not depend on visibility. The sun's light reaches Jupiter after a long journey, softened by distance. It illuminates surfaces gently, without glare. Shadows stretch slowly, without sharp edges. This muted light gives the entire system a calm tone. Nothing insists on being noticed. If your inner experience feels similarly dimmed or quiet now, that belongs here. Light does not need intensity to exist. Jupiter's clouds move beneath the moons, changing more quickly than the orbits above them. Storms form, stretch, and fade. The moons pass overhead, unaffected, existing on a slower rhythm entirely. You don't need to hold this contrast in mind. Fast and slow coexist without comment. Spacecraft that visit Jupiter pass through briefly, borrowing speed from gravity and moving on. They observe, measure, and depart. The moons do not respond. They do not alter their paths. They do not acknowledge the passing presence. If thoughts pass through your awareness in the same way briefly present, then gone that fits easily here, nothing here needs to be held. Jupiter's gravity shapes space gently, curving paths without force. Moons follow these curves effortlessly, moving where motion feels easiest. There is no sense of being pulled tight, only of continuing along paths that fit. You don't need to imagine guidance or direction. Motion here is simply what happens when nothing resists. As awareness continues to soften, drift, or rest somewhere between wakefulness and sleep, nothing in the Jovian system reacts. The moons do not pause, they do not hurry. They continue their steady motion through the dark orbit after orbit, quiet and complete whether you're listening closely, barely listening, or no longer listening at all. As this time together begins to loosen, nothing needs to be gathered or concluded. There is no summary waiting, no final thought to carry forward. The moons of Jupiter will continue exactly as they were moving, circling, resting within motion whether they are remembered or not. If you're feeling sleepy now, that's welcome. You don't need to stay awake for anything else to happen. The words don't need to be finished in your mind. They can fade wherever they are, mid-sentence or mid-image, without losing anything. And if you're still awake, quietly listening, that's welcome too. You can stay here for a moment longer, or let your attention drift somewhere else. Nothing here requires a choice. Jupiter keeps turning beneath its moons. Io continues warming and cooling in its gentle rhythm. Europa keeps its bright, fractured surface and its hidden ocean, sealed and patient. Ganymede remains broad and settled, moving with quiet certainty. Callisto continues its wide, unhurried path, carrying its long history without comment. None of them notice when a listener arrives. None of them notice when a listener leaves. They don't pause. They don't hurry. They simply continue orbit after orbit in the dark, in the distance, in a calm that doesn't need to be shared to exist. If sleep comes now, you're free to let it take you completely. Nothing will be missed. Nothing will be interrupted. And if sleep doesn't come, that's just as fine. You can rest here anyway, awake but unburdened, with no need to follow or hold on to anything. Thank you for spending this quiet time here. However long you stayed, however much you heard, however much you forgot it was enough. You're welcome to drift now. You're welcome to remain. You're welcome to simply be for a while longer as the moons continue their slow, steady paths through the dark.